Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was 24, while Chris Farmer was 25. He had decided to take his girlfriend on an adventure to explore faraway places and celebrate his achievements, while contemplating his future plans. Chris aimed to become a doctor, and he was dedicated to succeeding in that field. Recently, he had earned his medical degree, while his girlfriend, Peter, had graduated from law school. The families of Peter and Chris lived in the suburbs of Manchester, UK. Chris was the middle child among three siblings, his youngest sister Penny, his older brother Nigel, and himself. From a young age, Chris disliked restrictions and boundaries, but he was never aggressive or cruel. Instead, he had a free-spirited approach to life. The entire family was friendly and supportive of one another. Chris and Peter had met in school at age 14, and since then, they couldn't imagine life apart. Peter was active but more reserved, which helped balance Chris's enthusiasm. However, Peter and Chris decided to wait until after graduation to get married. Chris felt it was important to establish a stable foundation before starting a family, and Peter agreed with him. The couple loved to party and often took breaks to enjoy themselves. They frequently hosted themed gatherings, inviting many friends and acquaintances. Both had been working since a young age and had achieved financial independence. They held respected jobs, earned good salaries, and were able to travel. By that time, Peter and Chris had already explored Europe, visited Morocco, and traveled to various other destinations. In December 1977, they left their hometown for an adventure. Chris's younger sister, Penny, was envious of their journey. Chris and Peter spent about 6 months in Australia and loved it. They then decided to visit the Pacific Islands, explore the west coast of the United States, and eventually travel to Belize. They craved new experiences and want to live life to the fullest. Chris was passionate about traveling and often recorded video notes during his trips. He sent these videos and letters to his family, letting share in the adventures he had with Peter. On June 13, 1978, Chris' family and Peter's family received an update from them. They shared that they had been offered a short cruise along the coast on an American yacht called Dwayne Boston. This was a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some time on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since he was young and was always captivated by large bodies of sea. In his letter, he excitedly described Captain Boston, who had 2 children on board named Vince and Russell. The journey was expected to last about 2 weeks. Chris and Peter, a young couple, embarked on a sailing trip with Captain Boston, a seasoned sailor who called himself a pirate of the Caribbean. Chris and Peter were experienced in extreme adventures, and the trip should have been trouble-free. After a while, Peter and Chris' parents became worried because they no longer received any updates about their children. The trip seemed like an exciting opportunity, as Captain Boston's ship, though small, offered a chance to explore the sea and new destinations. Peter and Chris spent their days fishing, relaxing on beaches, and exploring different cities and forests. Peter and Chris's plan was to enjoy their time on the ship and then visit more countries on their own after Captain Boston dropped them off. However, Chris wrote in one of his letters that Captain Boston was very strict, monitoring their work closely and punishing even minor errors. Captain Boston thought this was the best method to train capable sailors and young men. Boston's approach to education differed greatly from that of Chris and Peter, who were often surprised by the strict discipline he enforced. However, they believed that for 2 weeks, serious issues wouldn't arise. Later, one of Captain Boston's children recalled that, at the start of the journey, everything felt quite normal. But as the ship became cramped and minor disagreements occurred, tensions grew to the point where the adults could barely tolerate each other. The children Vince and Russell also frequently argued over minor matters, while their father, Boston, appeared to be disengaged. Chris informed his relatives that their plans had slightly changed. They now decided to land in Livingston, Guatemala, which meant they would finish their trip earlier than expected. After that, Peter planned to fly to New Orleans, while Chris intended to travel to Trinidad. Chris expressed dissatisfaction with the small yacht trip, suggesting that they were growing weary of seeing the sea every day. Additionally, the boat's limited space prevented them from maintaining distance from other passengers, causing irritation among everyone involved in the journey. However, Peter and Chris continued their journey, sailing around various islands, which made their experience more enjoyable. One morning around 11 o'clock, they landed on an island and went to visit the local lighthouse. There was a party there, complete with a barbecue and plenty of drinks, and everyone joined in the festivities. This turned out to be their last happy memory before something tragic happened. Then, Peter also wrote and sent letters to her relatives along with Chris. In her last letter, she mentioned that life on the boat wasn't always easy. Captain Boston frequently scolded his sons and had a quick temper. At that time, there were no mobile phones or fast communication methods, so it took about 2 weeks for letters to be delivered. Unfortunately, after Peter stopped receiving letters from Chris, she also stopped writing them. Peter and Chris' parents do not understand what happened to their children. The situation was complicated by bureaucracy. During this time, Guatemala was experiencing a civil war. Although Livingston was distant from the main conflict, it is still dangerous for foreigners because of the many gangs operating here, of which drug trafficking is a big problem. Due to the families of Peter and Chris were deeply worried. In Guatemala, dense jungles made it easy to get lost or to fall victim to gang attacks. It was common for individuals to disappear entirely. In such case, kidnappings were frequent, and for a foreigner, simply getting lost in the jungle usually means will die. Peter's family and Chris's family searched for any leads to find their missing children. They sent numerous letters and appeals across Central America, reaching out to city officials and medical centers, but they received no useful information. It was as if their children had vanished completely. Peter's family and Chris's family were devastated when they could not find any information about their loved ones for 6 months. They then hired a private detective in Belize, who took on the case and quickly established contact with a Catholic priest in Guatemala. The priest revealed that the bodies of a young man and a young woman of European descent had been discovered the previous summer. There were suspicions that these could be the remains of Chris and Peter. Any hope that Peter and Chris were still alive seemed to have been completely dashed. In August of the 1970s, fishermen discovered 2 bodies about 200 meters from the shore. The bodies had drowned, and their hands and feet were tied to prevent them from floating. They were also attached to engine parts, and plastic bags were found over their heads. It was clear that their deaths were violent rather than accidental, as a forensic expert identified signs of severe beatings and torture. The examination revealed that the victims were still alive when they were thrown into the water. This is a huge blow to the Peter family and the Chris family. They had suspected that the bodies belonged to their missing relatives, Peter and Chris. 6 months earlier, at the time of the discovery, the identities of the victims from the massacre were still unknown. They were ultimately buried in a standard Guatemalan grave marked with white crosses. To identify the victims, their bodies needed to be exhumed and compared with dental records from the UK. Implementing this process in Guatemala is very difficult, leading the relatives of Peter and Chris to attempt sending the remains back to the UK for examination by more experienced forensic experts. However, they encountered issues such as translation problems, bureaucratic obstacles, and indifference from local authorities. Ultimately, the victims were identified as Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton using the dental records sent to Guatemala, but the process took an excessive amount of time. Sadly, the family's struggles continued as they sought answers about who could have harmed their children. Chris and Peta were happy and friendly people, and their relatives could not fathom why they had died. Sadly, the truth behind this tragedy was only uncovered 37 years later. Detectives from both the UK and the US investigated the case, but they were unable to find any leads. In the 1980s, British police officially closed the case without notifying Chris and Peta's families. Penny, the younger sister of Chris, wrote letters to he for 4 years, sending birthday and Christmas wishes, but received no response. This situation deeply affected both families, Peta and Chris, who lost their son and daughter. They consistently reached out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, newspapers, consulates, and police, seeking justice and updates on the investigation. Sadly, Chris's father and Peta's parents never received any answers and passed away before the case was resolved. In 2015, Chris's sister, younger Penny, decided to take charge of the investigation. She developed skills in online detective work. However, she had very little information about Chris' journey, except for the ship he has gone on at the time. Eventually, Penny located Boston, the captain of a sailing ship named Justin B., on which Chris and Peta has gone traveling before the tragic incident occurred. Penny pieced together limited information from Chris' letters. According to the letters, Chris and Peta detailed their plans to travel along the Caribbean coast with an American sailor and his 2 sons, aiming to reach Honduras. Boston, a native of Sacramento, California, was the last person to see Chris and Peta alive. In their last letters, Penny sensed tension between Chris, Peta, and Boston, leading to suspicions that Boston could be the killer. However, there was no solid evidence to support these claims. While walking her dogs, Penny suddenly had a realization about what she needed to do. She had previously created an anonymous social media account to monitor her 3 sons for safety reasons. This time, it dawned on her that she could use this account to gather evidence against Boston. She also felt it was essential to find Boston's sons, Vince and Russell, as she suspected they were involved in the murder of Chris and Peta. Penny located the accounts of both brothers, Vince, 13, and Russell, 12, at the time Chris and Peta were murdered. She confronted them, mentioning that her loved ones had died on Boston's ship, and demanded answers. Russell ignored her. However, after speaking with Vince, who was more open to discussing the matter, she became convinced that the brothers Vince and Russell were themselves deeply troubled by the killings of Chris and Peta. Vince explained that their father, Boston, was a cruel alcoholic who abused them. During the trip with Chris and Peta, he got drunk and killed them both, and it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Penny encouraged Vince to go to the Sacramento police station to testify. He appreciated Penny's persistence, feeling that it was finally time to tell the truth. Following her advice in October 2015, Vince viewed the confession as a long-anticipated relief. For many years, Vince experienced nightmares about this incident. His father, Boston, was a dangerous man who committed numerous brutal crimes. However, the most terrible thing, Vince lived with this secret for nearly 4 decades, torn between his fear of his father and his desire to expose the truth. He had previously informed his grandmother and the police about the murder his father committed, but they either dismissed him or ignored his claims. Now, however, his statements had convinced the police, causing them to conduct an investigation into archived documents from 37 years ago. As a result, the police in Manchester and the United States launched an investigation. By 2016, Boston was charged with double murder. Vince reported that he witnessed the murders of Chris and Peta, and his younger brother, Russell, who was 12 years old at the time of Chris and Peta's disappearance, also provided detailed accounts of what happened. Vince described how Boston brutally beat Chris, stripped him, tied him up, and attached many heavy parts of the car that were later found on the ship. When Boston pushed Chris over the side of the ship, he was still alive, but that didn't stop Boston. Afterward, he went down to the lower deck, where screams could be heard for a long time. Later, Chris was thrown overboard, tied up and naked, and drowned in deep waters, leaving no chance for survival. In his interview, Vince shared his experiences of living under the oppressive rule of his tyrannical father, Boston. While other fathers played with their children, took them on outings, and rode bicycles, Vince's father involved him in criminal activities, such as robberies. He intended to use his children to break into homes and harm people. However, Vince and Russell refused to participate, which only led to even harsher punishments from there. Vince felt relieved that, after many years of being overlooked, people finally listened to and believed him. At the time of the online investigation, he was 50 years old. Initially, he was too afraid to discuss the murder with anyone, not even his younger brother, Russell, who also witnessed it. Their father, Boston, had threatened them, saying that if they went to the police station, he would die. He justified his actions by claiming he had no choice, otherwise, Chris and Peter can report him, so he needed to eliminate them. Boston believed that informers were the worst kind of people. He worried about what would happen if Vince and Russell ever revealed what they had seen. Who would be the next victim? The threats and intimidation Vince and Russell faced deeply affected them. They had grown up under the oppressive control of an alcoholic father, who instilled fear in them and kept them quiet. Despite this, Boston's eldest son, Vince, wanted to speak out and tried to do so as soon as he escaped from his father's grasp. Vince noted that as an adult, he repeatedly reported the incident to the police, but his pleas were ignored and even mocked. At first, Penny believed Boston's children were involved in the crime. However, she soon realized they were actually victims of a criminal who had been tormenting them for years. Vince and Russell found themselves in a desperate situation, and Peter's fate was sealed as soon as they got on the ship. Records show they were misled into boarding under the false belief that Captain Boston was offering cruises called Robinson Crusoe. At first, life on the ship was enjoyable. The young passengers loved sailing and treated each other kindly. The Captain Boston took them to beautiful, remote locations, and they thought this journey would be a memorable adventure on their small vessel. However, the ship and its Captain Boston were not what they appeared. He took Chris and Peter on this trip to escape from the law. He wanted to avoid facing charges for a rape he had committed in California, so he fled to Belize. To the criminal Boston, Chris and Peter looked like a great opportunity for easy money. From the beginning, he planned to dock at a remote harbor to rob them and steal their belongings. As the police investigated this frightening man further, Boston, they discovered that he was likely involved in multiple murders. He had long been the main suspect in the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, who vanished after expressing her desire for a divorce and wanting to take their two sons, Vince and Russell, with her. Vince, the couple's son, recalled that his mother disappeared in 1968 when he was just 3 years old. The children deeply missed their mother and were forced to live with their abusive father. As Vince grew older, he came to understand the terrible nature of his father, who had killed a couple of travelers without remorse, and he began to suspect that Boston was also responsible for his mother's disappearance. Boston had a motive for Mary's murder. He wanted to avoid divorce, the division of assets, custody battles, and alimony payments. Vince and Russell's grandmother told them that Boston had shot Mary in the back, but it was unclear where she got this information, and Mary's body was never found. Ultimately, Boston's involvement in Mary's disappearance could not be proven due to lack of evidence. The brothers Vince and Russell often sought answers about their mother's, Mary's fate, but their father was reluctant to discuss it. During his childhood, whenever they brought up the subject, he would harshly punish them, which instilled a lasting fear in them about bringing up the topic. Boston's children, Vince and Russell, described their childhood as walking on a knife's edge. Boston was often drunk and could become aggressive, and when he used drugs, his behavior became erratic. This led to harsh punishments for the children. They were reprimanded for even minor missteps. For them, the boat trip was one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, as they feared they might suffer the same fate as their mother, Mary. However, during the trip, Vince fondly recalled Chris, who had taken the time to teach the boys new things. Since their mother's disappearance, they had not encountered such kindness in a long time. Boston was different around new people. He was charming, cheerful, and the life of the party. However, this changed when he became uncomfortable with strangers and began punishing his children again. For a while, Peter and Chris stayed silent and did not get involved in parenting issues because Boston insisted that his sons needed strict discipline. One day, Boston got drunk and started to physically abuse his two sons, Vince and Russell. This behavior outraged Chris, who could no longer stay quiet. He confronted Boston and criticized him for his cruelty. At that moment, Boston, still intoxicated, attempted to hit Chris, but Chris managed to dodge, causing Boston to fall overboard. Although he was helped back onto the boat, he held a deep grudge against Chris from that point on. Atmosphere tension and uncertainty filled after the incident. Boston felt compelled to take revenge because he thought Chris had insulted him. The following day, the couple Peter and Chris requested to be dropped off on shore. However, Boston attacked Chris from behind while he was distracted. He caught Chris off guard and struck him in the head with a single blow. Boston then delivered several powerful punches to Chris's chest and bound his hands and feet. Boston went down to the lower deck, where he knocked down and tied up Peter. The next day, he tortured and abused Peter and Chris, forcing Vince and Russell to take care of them. Vince and Russell were confused and didn't know what to do. They wanted to help Chris and Peter but were scared for their own safety. Peter asked Vince and Russell for assistance, but they did nothing. Despite the situation, Chris remained brave and did not cry. Days later, Boston announced Peter and Chris would be released on the shore. They were thrilled, thinking their suffering was coming to an end. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a cruel trick. After reaching deeper waters, he placed plastic bags over Peter and Chris' heads, tied them up, and then threw them overboard. It was essential to apprehend Boston, a brutal killer. Investigators discovered that he had sailed away from the coast of Guatemala on July 19. Only his sons, Vince and Russell, were left behind. After the incident, he returned to Sacramento and sold the yacht. During this time, he contacted authorities, claiming he had dropped off Peter and Chris near Livingston. He accused them of drug trafficking and using illegal drugs during their trip, which caused problems in Guatemala. However, the family of Peter and Chris knew that them relatives didn't use drugs. Despite this, Boston disappeared and could not be found due to bureaucratic complications, leaving the case unresolved. Sadly, the case never went to trial. Boston was eventually found in a nursing home in Eureka, California, and was arrested on December 1, 2016. While awaiting a hearing, he faced several health issues. Just weeks before Penny and her mother were set to fly to the U.S. for the hearing, Boston's health rapidly declined. In April 2017, at the age of 75, Boston died in custody. An autopsy revealed heart and liver problems. Medical staff at the prison hospital reported that after Boston learned about the upcoming hearings, he refused to take his prescribed medications, which worsened his condition. The penitentiary labeled Boston as a coward, who chose to end his life rather than confront the repercussions of the massacre he planned. Chris's family had hoped for justice to be served quickly, but the Supreme Court let them down. By this time, Peter's parents had passed away and they did not get to see the case solved. Eventually, Penny wrote a book about her brother, Chris, who was an extraordinary person and made a meaningful impact, even at a young age. In 2019, she traveled to Guatemala to visit the graves marked with white crosses where Peta and Chris were buried. Penny wept for her brother and for his girlfriend, who had stood by his side until the very end. This journey was difficult but helped her to confront her fears and pain. Chris's relatives continue to remember him, as he had aspirations of becoming a doctor and brought great pride to his family. His mother lived to be 99 years old and often felt it was unjust that her son was taken from her at the young age of 25. She often expressed that she would gladly trade several years of her life for him, believing he would have accomplished something extraordinary during that time. Everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of William Lewis Reese. William Lewis Reese was born in Oklahoma on July 1, 1959, the youngest of 13 children in his family. He grew up in Yukon and Anadarko. Due to his family's financial struggles, he had to drop out of school in the 9th grade to work as a farm laborer. He married Judy Flaming in 1979 after she became pregnant. After getting married, William joined the Oklahoma National Guard but eventually left. During this time, his marriage began to unravel, and Judy divorced him after just 1 year. However, William convinced Judy to remarry him, and they had another child together. Unfortunately, their marriage problems persisted, and heavy drinking led to physical abuse against Judy, ultimately causing their marriage to end again. Judy filed a complaint against her husband in 1982 after he physically abused her, claiming that he also threatened her life with a knife and a shotgun. As a result, Judy divorced him for the second time. William later remarried to another woman. However, this marriage was also short-lived, as his second wife divorced him just a few months later. And William's string of crimes resumed shortly after. In April 1986, William kidnapped a 19-year-old woman who was the daughter of a Texas sheriff's deputy. The woman's car broke down on her way to the gym. And William, who worked as a truck driver at that time, approached her and offered assistance by promising to take her to the nearest payphone in his truck. Once inside the vehicle, he restrained her and committed a sexual assault. He then drove her to a nearby motel where he reserved a room for the night. When Williams gave her permission to use the bathroom, she took advantage of the chance to break free and phone the police. He then was arrested, charged, and then released after posting bail. However, a month later, while still awaiting trial, he committed another sexual assault, resulting in a second arrest. Williams stood trial for both crimes, was found guilty, and received the 25 years prison sentence. However, upon reviewing his case, an appeals court found that there were procedural errors in the original trial. As a result, his sentence was significantly shortened and ultimately led to his parole in October 1996. William moved into his mother's home in Anadarko, Oklahoma, after serving 9.5 years. He regained his driver's license in early 1997 and then relocated to Houston, Texas. Shortly after, on May 16, 1997, he attempted to abduct and sexually assault Sandra Sapah, a 19-year-old. When Sandra stopped at a gas station in Webster, Texas, to use a payphone. After the call, she returned to her car and began driving but soon had a flat tire, forcing her to stop again. As she stood there, unsure of what to do next, William stopped the car behind her and offered to help. Sandra accepted his offer and got into the truck. However, William's intentions were sinister, and he overpowered her. Binding her wrists, then he continuing to drive on Interstate 45. Panicking, Sandra discovered that the door was unlocked. Despite being pregnant and fear for her life, Sandra made an attempt to escape by breaking free from the restraints and jumping out. Unfortunately, William caught hold of her and dragged her several miles along the pavement, causing severe injuries. Eventually, Sandra managed to break free and was taken to a nearby hospital. The police were notified, and she provided a description of her attacker. However, due to her traumatic state, she was unable to recall crucial details about the incident. To catch the predator, detectives needed more information. Months after the attack, they decided to use hypnosis on Sandra to see if she could remember anything else. Under hypnosis, Sandra recalled crucial details, including the license plate number of the truck that was involved in the crime. The detectives discovered a lead when they tracked down the owner of the vehicle with the matching license plate number. Which William? William was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to 60 years in prison in 1998. While he was serving his sentence, detectives began to suspect that he might be linked to other crimes. Unraveling these secrets took years, leaving several families without answers. On a rainy April 3, 1997, 12-year-old Laura Smither asked her mother for permission to go jogging by herself at 9 a.m. Her mother agreed, not knowing that this ordinary decision would change her life forever. Laura Smither is the daughter of Bob and Gay Smither. She grew up in Friendswood, along with her younger brother. From an early age, Laura demonstrated a kind and gentle nature. She excelled academically and showed great talent in ballet. After being accepted into the prestigious Houston Ballet Academy, her goal of becoming a professional ballerina became a reality just days before this tragic incident. Laura's mother was surprised when she asked to go jogging that day, as she rarely ventured out alone. Homeschooled by her parents, Laura didn't even attend school. However, her desire to improve her dance skills had recently inspired her to take up cardio exercises, such as jogging. She had planned to go for a short run while making breakfast, and her mother agreed, she unaware of the danger lurking nearby. When Laura failed to return after a few hours, her parents began to worry. Normally, Laura was under close supervision and never went out alone for long. Her father, Bob Smither, searched the neighborhood but found no sign of her. He figured his daughter wouldn't be out for long, but she later didn't come back. Laura's parents reached out to relatives and friends to see if anyone had any information about her whereabouts, but no one had seen her. And they contacted the police to file a missing persons report. According to Bob, Laura went jogging this morning and it took longer than he expected. As police began their investigation, locals joined Laura's family to assist in the search. With photos of Laura in hand, her family and neighbors went door to door, asking if anyone had any information. The next morning, the police resumed their search, on foot combing through the nearby woods and helicopters scouring the area from above. Despite the initial lack of leads, the community's determination never wavered. Hundreds of volunteers joined the cause, and the eventually swelling to 6,000 volunteers for a week. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies worked diligently to locate Laura. The National Coast Guard and the FBI also joined forces with the local police department to aid in the extensive search operation. Initial theories suggested that Laura may have become lost in the woods, but after that, the investigation went in one direction, now focus on the possibility of criminal behavior. On Sunday, April 20, 1997, a gathering at Friendswood High School was taking place to discuss the next steps in finding Laura. During this meeting, the police chief's expression became anxious after receiving the phone call, leaving those present there wondering what made him react like that. That evening at 10 p.m., Laura's parents received devastating news. A man walking his dog near a retention pond in Pasadena, about 12 miles from where Laura went missing, stumbled upon a badly decomposing body of a young girl. The girl was wearing only a pair of socks and was found in a muddy area. The police immediately suspected that the body was Laura's, and this was later confirmed through an autopsy. Everyone was devastated by the sudden and tragic loss of Laura. In addition to their grief, fear gripped the neighborhood, with many worried that a predator was on the loose and could target another child. To address these concerns and prevent further harm, the police opened an investigation, but initially they had no information about the perpetrator. To gather more information, the police started interviewing sex offenders in the area. They began to focus on William Reese, a 38-year-old equipment operator, was working at Windsor Estate in Friendswood at the time. On the day of Laura's disappearance, William left the workplace around the time she went missing and returned 30 minutes later, it raising suspicions about his activities during that short period. Police conducted an in-depth investigation but were unable to find any evidence shows that William is involved in this crime. As a result, the case went unsolved for years, leaving many questions unanswered. 19 years later, another mysterious disappearance happened to Kelly Cox, 20 years old. Kelly, a criminology student at the University of North Texas, in Denton on July 15, 1997, she and her classmates took a field trip to a local prison in Denton for a criminology class. She left her car in the parking lot across from the police station and had hidden a spare key in a magnetic box underneath her car. She then locked her belongings, including her cell phone, inside the car as instructed by her professor. After completing the jail tour at noon, Kelly rushed to her car to go to the university to take a test. However, when she tried to use the spare key to open her car door, it did not work, despite she checking it the night before. Since Kelly's phone was locked in her car, so she went to a nearby gas station and used a payphone to call her boyfriend, Lawrence Harris III, for help. She then purchased a drink inside the gas station. But from that point on, Kelly was never seen alive again. After about 45 minutes, Lawrence arrived at the meeting place, but when he got there, her car was still in the parking lot, yet Kelly herself was nowhere to be found. Neither the key box nor the key were present at the scene. He spent some time searching for Kelly, and when he couldn't find her, he decided to call her mother to see if she had returned home safely. However, Kelly's mother informed him that she hadn't arrived. Despite the initial suspicion surrounding Kelly's disappearance, but her family chose to wait a little longer to see if she would come back. It wasn't until 5:30 p.m. that same day when Kelly failed to pick up her 19-month-old daughter, Alexis, from her babysitter, that her family became certain that something was amiss. Kelly's family knew that she was a responsible mother, and it was entirely out of character for her to neglect her daughter like that. When Kelly was reported missing, the police immediately started searching for her. In keeping with standard procedure in missing persons cases, the police started by scrutinizing people close to Kelly. Initially, they focused on Kelly's boyfriend Lawrence, but after he passed 4 polygraph tests, he was cleared as a suspect. The case made progress when information led them to another potential suspect, William Reese, who had been under investigation in the Laura Smithers case. William, a sex offender, was considered a top suspect in Kelly's disappearance because a gas station receipt placed him in the Denton area on the same day Kelly vanished, even though he didn't live there at the time. The police searched his car for Kelly's fingerprints but did not find any. Without any leads, witnesses, or surveillance footage, the case stalled and went unsolved for many years. Kelly's disappearance was extremely difficult for her mother and stepfather, who had to raise Alexis on their own. As the years went by, Kelly never returned, but her daughter followed in her mother's footsteps, attending the same university. Alexis held on to the hope that her mother would come back one day. Kelly's family never lost hope of her return, continued to share her story, and kept her picture visible. Unfortunately, their wish never came true, and Kelly never made it back home. On the morning of August 17, 1997, Jessica Kane, a 17-year-old high school student, failed to return home after attending a theater party the night before. Jessica was born on August 28, 1979. She is known for her vibrant personality, creativity, and passion for sports. While studying at O'Connell High School in Galveston, Texas, she did well academically and served as captain of the school's coaching team. After focusing on her drama career and participating in numerous plays, Jessica attended a musical review in Dickinson on August 16, 1997. Following the event, she joined her friends at a cast party at Bennigan's on Bay Avenue Boulevard. However, Jessica did not return home that night, worrying her mother, who woke her father and called her. They reached out to several friends who had attended the party with Jessica, and all of them reported that she had left around 1:30 a.m. Jessica's parents immediately sensed that something was wrong and began searching for her. Upon investigating, Jessica's father found her vehicle parked near the Lamarck exit, close to the freeway, with her valuables still intact. He later quickly reported his to the police. As police began their investigation, hundreds of volunteers joined in the search for Jessica. During this challenging time, Jessica's parents met Bob and Gay Smither, a couple who had also lost their daughter, Laura Smither. Jessica's family and the Smithers family are going through their own grief. The Smithers family has tried to support Jessica's parents in their search for her. Despite the best efforts of police and volunteers, no sign of Jessica has been found. As a result, police are beginning to consider foul play and believe the chances of Jessica being found alive are extremely low. The case eventually went cold, but Jessica's family never gave up searching for their daughter. In a separate incident, on July 26, 1997, 19-year-old Tiffany Johnson's car was found abandoned at a car wash in Bethany, Oklahoma. But she disappeared without a trace. Tiffany was born on April 6, 1978, to Michael and Kathy Dober. She was the youngest daughter, extremely close to her family, especially her mother. Tiffany was a lively and optimistic young woman who grew up in a small town, with a passion for plants and gardening that she inherited from her grandfather. After graduating from high school in 1996, she married Ryan Johnson in 1997 and moved to Bethany, Oklahoma, where she took on 2 jobs to save money for college. Her dream was to attend Oklahoma State University to pursue a degree in botany. But unfortunately, that goal was never realized. On July 26, 1997, Tiffany finished her part-time shift at a restaurant around 2 p.m. She later headed home to get ready for a night out with her husband, Ryan, to celebrate their 3-month anniversary. Tiffany was supposed to meet Ryan at 11 p.m., but before that, she stopped at the Sunshine Car Wash to wash her white neon Dodge. Tragically, she was never seen again. When Ryan went looking for her that night, he couldn't find her at home and found no signs of her whereabouts. A police officer from the Bethany Police Department discovered Tiffany's abandoned white Dodge Neon at a car wash around midnight. The car's key was still in the ignition, and the door was open. The officer found Tiffany's purse inside the vehicle and a phone number for her mother, Kathy, in the glove box. However, when contacted, Kathy had no information about her daughter's whereabouts. The investigators then reached out to Tiffany's husband, Ryan, who also claimed to be unaware of his wife's location. This raised concerns, and it became apparent that something was amiss. The next day, July 27, 1997, near I-40 and Gregory Road, searchers found the body of a young Caucasian woman. When the police arrived at the scene, they suspected the body might be Tiffany's. The suspicion was confirmed when her husband Ryan identified the body from the pictures. Tiffany's body was found with only a swimsuit on, as all other clothing had been removed. The autopsy results revealed that Tiffany was sexually assaulted and strangled to death, although the exact time of her death could not be confirmed. Authorities collected unknown DNA from her body as evidence. With no leads on a suspect, investigators initially focused on Ryan, Tiffany's husband. However, they soon discovered that Tiffany was last seen at the car wash at 6 p.m., and Ryan had a solid alibi, having been at work from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. A new lead emerged when the car wash owner contacted investigators, reporting that he saw a customer on the same day Tiffany disappeared. The customer was a man named William Reese, who had been featured in a news report a few months earlier for his involvement in an abduction in Texas. What's more noteworthy is that William has a personal relationship with Tiffany. His mother was good friends with Tiffany's mother, although he himself had never met Tiffany. After her death, he even called Tiffany's mother to offer his condolences. Despite this new information, police were still unable to gather enough evidence to prove William's involvement in Tiffany's murder, and the case remained unsolved for a long time. In 2015, thanks to advancements in DNA technology, investigators found new evidence in the Tiffany case. A DNA swab taken during Tiffany's autopsy in 1997 was sent to the lab for testing. The results matched a DNA profile in the Cody's database, which implicated William in Tiffany's murder. He was subsequently charged in Oklahoma City with the 1997 kidnapping and murder of Tiffany. Just as his trial was about to begin, William unexpectedly started confessing to other crimes in an attempt to reach a deal with the prosecution. Despite having eluded police for 19 years, he ultimately revealed the truth, having a history of aggravated kidnapping and other crimes. When shown photos of Laura Smither, Jessica, and Kelly Cox, he immediately accepted responsibility for their murders and disappearances, although denying any sexual motive behind his actions. William was questioned about his victims in Oklahoma. He agreed to cooperate with authorities by showing them the burial sites of two victims, Jessica and Kelly, on one condition: he would not face the death penalty. In April 2016, investigators followed him to a location in a Houston pasture where human remains were discovered. After several days of excavation, the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed that the remains belonged to Jessica. The search continued in Brazoria County, where another set of human remains was found. Dental records confirmed that these remains belonged to Kelly Cox. The trial for the murder of another victim, Tiffany, began in May 2021. William was found guilty by a jury on May 28, 2021, and received a death sentence on August 19, 2021, for her abduction and murder. After his murder conviction in Oklahoma, he was sent to Texas in March 2022 to face trial for the murders of Laura Smither, Kelly Cox, and Jessica. He pleaded guilty to all three charges and received a life imprisonment sentence in June 2022. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Marie Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. She is the eldest child and only daughter of Donald Hatcheney and Diana Parle. Her father worked in a shipyard, while her mother was a homemaker. Dawn grew up with her three brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. Dawn developed a strong faith from an early age. According to her mother, she accepted God into her life at the age of 4. However, her childhood was also challenging. Her parents struggled with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts at home. When Dawn was about 11 years old, her mother, Diana, left the family for another man. This new relationship resulted in the birth of another child. However, the relationship did not last, and Diana eventually returned to the family, bringing her newborn child with her. Despite these hardships, Dawn did well in school. She worked hard to achieve good grades and overcome her challenges. Her hard work paid off when she entered the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee at age 12. This achievement not only led her to the White House, but also gave her the opportunity to meet former President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated as valedictorian from Bremerton Christian School in 1988 and then attended Northwest College of the Assemblies of God Church in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatcheney, and they quickly formed a close relationship. However, Dawn's friends were concerned when she called Nick her other half after only a few dates, as they worried that Nick's assertive personality might not be a good fit for her. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would be unwaveringly supportive and emotionally committed. Nick grew up in Poulsbo, Washington, and his childhood shared some similarities with Dawn's. However, his family life was difficult. His father, Dan, was often distant and busy with work, leaving Nick feeling neglected. Nick's mother, Sandra, was busy with home daycare and foster care, which left Nick feeling like he was not a priority to her. He even felt that his mother favored his biological siblings and adopted children over him, leading Nick to believe that she hated him. Nick struggled with the emotional distance between his parents, especially his mother's long-term depression and his father's lack of attention. As a result, Nick lacked emotional support and connection from his family, which had a profound impact on his life. Despite his isolation, Nick found comfort and faith in the Bible and Christianity, which boosted his confidence during his teenage years but occasionally led to social isolation due to his growing self-assurance. Nick and Dawn first met in college. Initially, Dawn's friends found it strange that she liked Nick because his personality was completely different from hers. She was outgoing and confident, while Nick was not. However, as Dawn spent more time with Nick, she began to change. She was no longer the confident, independent, and driven person she once was. Instead, she became shy and indecisive, often agreeing with Nick's decisions even when they were not right for her. Although their relationship seemed unhealthy, their love for each other remained strong. Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach in 1990, and they were married on April 20, 1991. As newlyweds, they moved to Bremerton, where Dawn worked as a loan officer and Nick became a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. Nick had always aspired to be a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, where he had previously had a good relationship with a pastor named Smith. However, Nick gradually drifted away from Smith when he found doctrinal agreement with Pastor Robert Billy Craig. Robert saw Nick as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plan to overthrow Smith and take complete control of the church as senior pastor. Meanwhile, in 1997, Dawn and Nick faced housing problems due to frequent moves, living in houses they had renovated and sold. Dawn dreamed of having a family and a stable life. To solve this problem, Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton and planned to move in, renovate it, and make it their home. However, the purchase and repair of the house put Nick and Dawn in debt. Although their relationship appeared perfect, with Dawn being Nick's supportive and accommodating wife, there were hidden problems that no one saw. Dawn even joked that if she and Nick broke up, Nick would stay with her instead of moving back to his parents' house. Meanwhile, Nick continued to borrow money from church members, putting him further into debt. He embarked on an ambitious project to start a Christian youth camp. Although the project was financially taxing, Nick committed to it because he had a strong desire to do so. Nick's story was closely related to Sandy Glass, a parishioner of Christ Community Church. When Nick was trying to find the right land to build his youth camp, Sandy confirmed once again that he had great ambitions. Sandy Glass's life had been full of ups and downs. She had faced many hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend died of an unknown illness, her father died in a construction accident, and her brother struggled with drug addiction. She married Jimmy, a carpenter, but their financial situation was strained because the family depended entirely on Jimmy's income while Sandy stayed home to care for the children. Sandy also struggled with her spending habits, often living beyond her means. This led to frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These arguments sometimes caused Jimmy to express his frustration by yelling or withdrawing from the situation. To resolve their marital conflicts, Sandy and Jimmy sought help from the church and attended marriage counseling sessions coordinated by Nick. Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, some parishioners filed complaints with Pastor Robert about Nick's counseling style. They were upset that Nick often asked personal questions and ignored other important issues. His discussions often focused on sexual issues, ignoring other aspects of marriage. Despite this, church members trusted Nick because he had the support of their former pastor, Smith. They felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with this role if he were not trustworthy. In the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert replaced Smith as senior pastor. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also church members, disagreed with his decision to seek church counseling. They were skeptical about Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. When Nick focused primarily on Sandy, they became even more concerned because they felt he should focus on both of them equally. The relationship between Nick and Sandy went beyond the boundaries of a normal mentoring relationship. They spent too much time talking on the phone, meeting at church, and even outside. This made Jimmy's parents feel that their relationship was inappropriate as they interacted frequently and acted intimately. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately. She expressed her concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advised him to focus on his own marriage. When complaints about Sandy and Nick's relationship arose, Robert had to intervene. He warned Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end immediately. However, Sandy felt that she had a special connection with Nick. She wrote a letter to Robert, expressing her anger and frustration. In the letter, she stated that she felt Robert did not trust her. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, along with Jimmy and Sandy's children, felt hurt by this. At one point, one of their children told Jimmy that Sandy and Nick had talked about Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn began to share her grief with her friends. She told them about her financial situation and her desire to have children, but Nick was against the idea. By the end of 1997, Nick was romantically involved with several women besides Sandy. He spent time with them in private and on phone calls that lasted for hours. However, Sandy dreamed of the beautiful future she hoped to have with Nick. She encouraged him to invest more in the plan to open a youth camp and develop a romantic relationship with her. She believed that both of them were brought together by fate. A group of women in the congregation had tried to clear things up with Dawn, letting her know that the problems in her marriage with Nick had not been her fault, but rather Nick himself. However, her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she had married him. Back on Christmas, Dawn had woken up feeling unwell. Still, she and Nick had decided to visit her family and spend the day together. Later that evening, they had gone to Smith's house and spent time with his family. Early the next morning, the 26th, Nick had planned to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends. Before leaving, Nick had met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County. After a few hours in the woods without catching anything, they had decided to return and have breakfast at a local diner around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick had suddenly become concerned and said that Dawn and he had not opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick had left the diner and returned home. At 10 a.m., he had discovered that his wife had died in a fire. Investigators had discovered that the fire had initially started in Nick and Dawn's bedroom due to a faulty space heater. The space heater had burned fiercely and quickly spread due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper in the room. The situation had been made worse by the presence of multiple propane tanks on the floor. There had been a surprising detail in the story. Less than an hour earlier, Nick had told his friends at the diner that he and Dawn had not opened their Christmas presents. However, when he had spoken to the authorities, he had said that they had opened the presents the night before. Nick had explained that his wife, Dawn, had been feeling unwell and had gone to bed. He also had said he had received a propane tank as a Christmas gift. Because they had frequently renovated their home, they had to use a space heater during the winter. This type of heater often lacks modern safety features, leading to fires and deaths. The police had found no evidence that Nick's story had been false. As a local pastor, Nick had been well respected in the community, and there had been no reason to suspect him of any involvement in his wife's death. Nick's congregation had tried to support him during what they had believed was a difficult time. Pastor Robert had suggested a way to try to ease Dawn's grief through prayer. However, Nick had rejected the idea, saying he had wanted Dawn to not experience any more pain. This rejection had surprised Pastor Robert, as Nick had previously been actively involved in church activities, including exorcisms. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, had soon become suspicious of Nick's role in Dawn's death. She had thought that Dawn's death had not been an accident. She had urged her husband to contact the police to investigate, but this had not happened. Shortly thereafter, the police had determined that Dawn's death had been an accident, and the case had been turned over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had received a large sum of money from his life insurance policy. This had been a bit strange to his friends and family, but they had later understood that Nick and Dawn's large debts and Nick's desire to build a youth camp had made him need the money. Some church members had found Nick's way of grieving for Dawn unusual, but they had not voiced their concerns because they had thought that people process grief differently. The church community then had held a celebration of Dawn's life, where family and friends had gathered to share stories about her and remember her life. During the celebration, Nick had shown remarkable composure throughout the funeral. Additionally, friends who had been helping clean Nick's house had discovered pictures of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet. This had suggested that Nick had wanted to remove memories of Dawn. Nick also had begun to show a cold and indifferent attitude towards many people, including some church members, neighbors, and friends. Nick's behavior had become even more suspicious when he had quickly developed a close relationship with Dawn's mother, Diana, under the guise of mourning his widowhood. This had shocked and outraged many. Even Pastor Robert could not stand Nick's behavior and had asked him to leave Christ Community Church. This expulsion had been a huge blow to Nick and marked the beginning of troubles in his life. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney to negotiate her plea. In exchange for immunity, she had to reveal a secret that had been kept since the morning of December 26. Sandy recounted that on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick contacted her and said, "I did it." However, the conversation was interrupted by another call from the church informing her of Dawn's death. After the call ended, Sandy turned to Nick to clarify what he meant, but Nick simply said, "It's over, it's over." After several weeks, Sandy confronted Nick. At this point, he confessed to his crime. He had overdosed Dawn with Benadryl and then covered her face with a plastic bag to suffocate her. Dawn was still semi-conscious and had to watch as Nick murdered her. After making sure Dawn was dead, Nick arranged the crime scene to make it look like an accidental fire. He placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, underneath Dawn's body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He also arranged the fireplace to cause a fire in order to erase any evidence of his crime. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. However, this result did not accurately reflect reality because Dawn's red blood cells showed signs of carbon monoxide. The person in charge of Dawn's autopsy concluded that her death was an accidental fire, ignoring important evidence. One reason for this conclusion was that since Dawn was the wife of a pastor, it was thought that Dawn could not have been involved in any adulterous behavior. Although carbon monoxide bound to red blood cells, an autopsy revealed that Dawn did not inhale smoke. However, she had overdosed on the drug Benadryl, 5 times the normal dose. Some believe that this dose was not enough to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist also suggested that even if she had been asleep, Dawn would have reacted to the increased temperatures of the fire. Interestingly, crime scene photos showed newspapers underneath Dawn's body, but this detail was largely overlooked. Nick was finally arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot and vehemently denied any involvement in Dawn's death. Nick still faced a first-degree murder charge. His bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's testimony to investigators added to the frustration with the police over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. Sandy cooperated with investigators because she was angry that Nick had relationships with other women in the church and felt taken advantage of. She believed that God did not approve of their relationship and that therefore Dawn's murder was against God's will. Church members who were questioned described Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships. They also expressed frustration that he did not buy Dawn a tombstone after receiving the life insurance money. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He alleged that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert was a much more evil influence than the police could understand. Nick's trial then began. Nick was initially charged with first-degree murder, but the charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses who testified included women who had relationships with Nick and several church members who had confided in him. They provided information that helped the jury better understand Nick. They had shared details of experiences they believed involved visions and direct messages from God, but in reality, Nick had used these to rationalize and manipulate others. Smith's daughter testified, describing how she had been introduced to Nick through her father, and how Nick had taken advantage of her during her teenage years. The sexual relationship between her and Nick had begun shortly after Dawn had died and continued until she had moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts had also testified, noting that Dawn's body had contained important clues regarding the events of that day. However, these clues had been ignored because Nick had been a pastor. Although there had been no signs of soot or carbon monoxide, which would have been unusual for a living, breathing person in a fire, the defense had vigorously contested these allegations. They had focused their efforts on portraying Nick's ex-partner, Sandy, as a jealous and vengeful man who had fabricated the accusations when he had discovered Nick's affairs with various women. On December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury had deliberated for a day before finding Nick guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick had addressed Dawn's friends and family, asserting his innocence but expressing remorse for his actions and sharing his sorrow for their loss. Nick had acknowledged that Dawn had deserved better treatment and had been sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court had resulted in a modification of his sentence. The appeal had argued that the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder did not match Dawn's actual cause of death, as she had died from strangulation. The defense had argued that Nick did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the appeal and commuted Nick's sentence to 26 years. Nick would be eligible for parole in 2025 and might be eligible for early release. Dawn had gone too soon, but not forgotten. She had chosen a life with someone she had trusted, but that had not come true. Sadly, that had led to betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Megan Landowski. Megan Landowski lived with her family in Portsmouth, Virginia, a bustling seaport town. Her family included her father, Chris Short, a Navy officer, her mother, Angela, and 2 other siblings. Chris Short had been transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth after a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Chris's family felt relieved when they moved there. Megan Landowski, 16 years old, was the oldest in the family. When her family moved, she quickly signed up for dance classes. Megan had a deep passion for dance and showed outstanding talent from the beginning. She started with ballet and then expanded into many different genres. Megan's mother described her as a beautiful, friendly, and talented girl. Megan adapted quickly to her new learning environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. She had an attractive personality and easily made friends with her classmates. Although she attended a prestigious high school that specialized in dance, Megan wanted to attend a regular high school so she could hang out with friends in her neighborhood. She was described as vivacious and kind, with a natural tendency to connect with people. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early to go to school. She chatted with her mother about the upcoming test before going to class. After saying goodbye to Angela, Megan went to school. Angela had no idea that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early, and she went home. Angela had told Megan that she expected Megan's call when she got home. Upon arriving, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring Angela that she had returned safely, and ending by telling Angela she loved her. Then she continued to prepare lunch for herself. However, things took a terrifying and disturbing turn around 4 p.m. Megan's stepfather, Chris, returned home and found the door open. Although he didn't worry at first, he knew Megan had been warned about leaving the door open, so he trusted that she wouldn't leave it unattended like that. He called her name, but there was only silence. When he entered the kitchen, he was faced with a horrifying sight: Megan lying motionless on the floor. Chris quickly called the police and reported the incident. Local detective Doug Funkhauser suddenly received an alarming call reporting the murder of a young girl in town. Immediately, he rushed to the location of the crime, Roberts Court in Portsmouth. When he approached the scene of the crime, he saw horrifying signs. The bloodstains on the door handle were very clear. When he entered the kitchen, he discovered a gruesome scene. The body of a young girl lay on the floor, her body seriously injured. Megan had suffered multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed with tape. For Detective Doug, this case was one of the most brutal cases he had ever investigated. An initial investigation revealed no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf found inside the home matched a bush outside a first-floor window, suggesting that the killer may have entered through that window. In the upstairs bedroom, signs of a struggle were evident on the bed. Megan's underwear was on the floor, and a box of duct tape was found under the left corner of the bed, appearing to match the tape used to bind Megan's hands and face. Forensic experts found blood on the tape and other items, which were collected for further analysis, including pillows, sheets, and blankets. Additional forensic testing indicated that the bedroom was the scene of the sexual assault, as traces of the killer's semen were found on Megan's comforter and underwear. These findings suggested that Megan had been assaulted in the bedroom before the attack downstairs. Megan was found with a large number of injuries, 43 stab wounds, including 11 post-mortem. The forensic team also reported that Megan was naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back with duct tape. The murder weapon was determined to be a missing kitchen knife. Investigators later found the knife in the sink and determined that the initial attack had occurred in the bedroom, but Megan had somehow escaped down the stairs. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator left footprints during the crime and then washed his hands in the kitchen sink. A second knife used in the crime was discovered in a nearby drain. Detectives quickly searched the neighborhood for witnesses, but no one provided any useful information. The killer appeared to have escaped undetected during the day. After the shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly alerted the police to their suspicions regarding the identity of the killer. They suspected an old acquaintance with a troubled past and believed he may be involved in the case. This person is Robert Hickey, a former colleague of Chris's in the Navy who had sexually assaulted Megan when she was 16. Chris and Robert had worked together as technicians and had become close friends, often inviting Robert and his family to their home. Megan's behavior changed dramatically after the abuse. She became withdrawn, and her grades began to decline. Chris noticed the change and asked her what was wrong, but she was initially reluctant to talk about it. Eventually, Megan confided in Chris, revealing that Robert had been sexually assaulting her in secret. Chris was furious and immediately cut off ties with the Hickeys. He also reported the abuse to the authorities. Around the same time, Megan's parents filed a lawsuit against Robert, just 5 months before she was murdered. The trial is pending, and Megan is expected to testify against him. Robert has a lot at stake, including his reputation and his freedom. Megan expressed concern that Robert might try to harm her to prevent her from testifying, and unfortunately, it appears that her fears have come true. When police searched Robert's home, they did not find any direct evidence linking him to Megan's murder. However, upon closer inspection of his computer, they discovered that he had attempted to erase the hard drive. Investigators were able to recover a recently deleted file containing sexually explicit images of minors. This discovery led to Robert being charged with possession of child pornography and becoming the prime suspect in Megan's murder. He was brought in for questioning, and authorities hope that he will confess to the crime. Robert was visibly nervous throughout the interview, but he insisted that he was at the Navy base on the day of Megan's murder. He denied any involvement and claimed he had not left the base. However, after verifying his alibi with his colleagues, the police discovered a gap in his timeline, raising the possibility that he might have been involved in the murder. The police obtained surveillance footage from the base but found no evidence that Robert had left. Despite this, he remained a suspect. To investigate further, a DNA sample was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results showed no match, ruling out Robert as the killer. This discovery left the police without any leads or suspects, leaving them frustrated. They then turned their attention to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After taking a DNA sample from Chris, he was quickly cleared. Megan's family members, including her younger brother, Corey, were also ruled out as suspects. The autopsy revealed that the murder was extremely brutal, indicating that the perpetrator had used extreme violence against Megan. Given Megan's popularity and gentle nature, it was difficult to narrow the investigation based on hostile relationships. This made the identity of the killer even more mysterious. The investigation into Megan's case did not produce any suspects. Detectives focused on Megan's life at school and interviewed each of her friends. Megan's best friend was interviewed but did not provide any useful information. Police then spoke to other friends and acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School and learned that Megan had dated a few people but nothing too serious. Although these men did not appear to be suspects, police asked them to provide DNA samples as a precaution. Meanwhile, experts retested DNA from the crime scene, which suggested that the killer was likely an African American male. For 6 months, no major developments were made, but that changed when a helpful classmate provided valuable information, a list of boys with whom Megan had occasionally flirted. Police looked through the list and found that they had spoken to all of the boys on the list, except for one, a 17-year-old named Robert Lee Barnes. Megan and Robert Barnes were both in the performing arts program at Churchill High School. Megan confided in her friend that she believed Robert might have a crush on her. At school, Robert was considered an excellent violinist, and as a student, he had always earned good grades, exhibited exemplary behavior, and had no disciplinary problems. As one of Megan's friends, Robert visited Megan's home several times, showing respectful behavior during these visits, and Megan's parents were very fond of him. When the police questioned Robert about Megan, he described her as a kind and pleasant person and was shocked that someone would want to harm her. He mentioned that he and Megan had attended shows together and occasionally hung out. However, Towards the end of the interview, Robert's demeanor changed when he was asked to provide a DNA sample. Unlike Megan's other classmates, who were cooperative with the request, Robert hesitated and then refused, which aroused the suspicion of the investigators. Robert said that his mother did not allow the DNA test, but the police informed him that his parents' permission was not required because he was almost 18 years old. However, Robert still refused. This refusal made the investigators feel uncomfortable and suspicious that something was wrong with Robert. Therefore, after the interview ended, the investigators suggested that he talk to his mother and try again. The day after the initial investigation, Robert contacted the authorities to request a meeting. When asked if he had obtained his mother's permission, he replied that he had not, but he had given them a piece of his chewing gum as a DNA sample. Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a rubber glove, and gave it to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators remained suspicious of Robert. The DNA lab then contacted the detective to inquire about the sample's source. After confirming that Robert had indeed placed the gum in the glove, the lab questioned whether he had been continuously monitored while providing the gum. This investigation was prompted by the surprising fact that the DNA on the gum matched that of a woman. It turned out that Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with another piece before handing it to the investigators. On October 23, 2008, Robert was called in for questioning again, this time with his mother. When confronted with the DNA findings, Robert was asked about the chewing gum. He made a critical mistake by stating, "This happened on Thursday." Up until that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When the officers pointed this out to Robert, he provided an implausible explanation. According to Robert, on that Thursday, Megan had asked him to visit her home. Upon his arrival, Robert claimed to have found Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. The alleged attacker held the gun to Robert, forcing him to tie Megan up. Robert then fabricated a story that he had been compelled to sexually assault Megan. He further claimed that they all went downstairs, where the attacker stabbed Megan after obtaining a knife. Ultimately, Robert stated that the attacker had forced him to inflict an injury on himself to ensure his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert fabricated a false story to portray himself as the victim and to explain away any incriminating evidence. However, the police did not believe his account. When presented with evidence of footprints found at the scene, the investigator asked Robert why only his footprints were found and not those of the person he claimed had attacked him. Robert's mother intervened, telling Robert to stop talking and asserting that Robert was a good and innocent person. The police then took a DNA sample from Robert. The DNA analysis showed a match between Robert's DNA and the DNA found at the crime scene. As a result, Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. According to police, Robert likely broke into the house through a window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom. He then attacked her, and when she tried to escape downstairs, he chased her, stabbing her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she was dead. After the crime, Robert left the scene and continued his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Robert became unhealthily obsessed with Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Robert's romantic advances were rejected, he turned to coercion, which led to a tragic end. In September 2009, Robert accepted a plea deal that allowed him to be tried as a juvenile, despite having just turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. As a result, Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of the motive behind Robert's actions, whether it was love, lust, bitterness, or the pain of rejection, none of these reasons justify his horrific crimes against the person he claimed to love and care for. Robert chose the path of destruction, taking the life of an innocent person and ruining his own life. Detectives. Welcome back. we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Valentina Tres Palacios. Valentina Tres Palacios was born on December 16, 2001, in Bogota, Colombia. She is currently studying international business and commerce, but her true passion is music. Since childhood, she has loved music and pursued this passion by studying and becoming a professional DJ. After receiving her DJ certificate, Valentina started her career in Colombia and quickly made a name for herself due to her talent and exceptional musicality. Throughout her career, she has made many friends from different countries. Valentina has had the opportunity to travel to many countries to perform and showcase her talent. She has performed with famous musicians and has toured more than 20 cities in her country. She has also participated in important international events, including festivals in Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru. With her talent and musicality, Valentina has been recognized as having a bright future ahead. She is loved and sought after across the country and regularly performs at top nightclubs. Valentina is a cheerful young woman who is always smiling and loves to party. She also maintains social media accounts where she shares her performances and updates her followers on her daily life. Valentina shares two important aspects of her life on social media: her growing popularity in the music industry and her romantic relationship with John Poulos, an American she met online in late 2021. As their relationship progressed, their communication improved significantly. Initially, Valentina was not looking for a serious relationship, but she eventually became attracted to John, and their relationship turned into a romance. John Poulos, a resident of the United States, showed a deep interest in Valentina's life. Valentina invested a lot in their relationship, and John supported her financially to help achieve her dreams. Valentina took a cosmetic course, which included hyaluronic acid injections into her lips, and later, enhancements to her cheekbones. John also recommended surgery in silicone breast implants, which significantly changed her appearance within a few months. These changes made Valentina the talk of the town. John sent her money regularly and eventually decided to marry her. John Poulos initially planned to move to Colombia to live with Valentina. However, Valentina became suspicious of the relationship because she knew that John was extremely jealous and had hired a private investigator to monitor her every contact and activity. By January 2023, John had committed to marrying Valentina and began arranging the necessary paperwork. He had also rented an apartment in the northern part of Bogota, where he planned to spend weekends with Valentina until they found a permanent place to live. However, on January 22, 2023, a garbage collector discovered a blue suitcase in a dumpster near a park in Colombia. The suitcase was taped shut and surrounded by several trash bags. When the worker opened the suitcase, they discovered the body of a woman whose head was clearly visible inside. The worker was so frightened by the discovery that he drove several blocks away before calling the police. The Capitol Police Department quickly dispatched a team to investigate the incident. The officers who arrived at the scene witnessed a horrific sight. The victim's body was found in a suitcase. After several hours of investigation, the police identified the victim as Valentina Tres Palacios. An initial examination of the body showed no signs of violence, no weapons or knives were found, and there was no dismemberment. However, after opening the suitcase, detectives discovered that the victim was wearing pajamas with a belt. This suggested that the victim may have been attacked while she was sleeping. Additionally, police found a black cardboard box inside the suitcase containing items that could help identify the body, including a student ID card, a password that the victim often used, and several other documents and personal belongings. Investigators discovered something strange among the items they collected. These types of documents are not often found in similar cases. After finding the suitcase containing the body, the police contacted Valentina's family and learned that she had attended a party with friends on Saturday, January 21st. Forensic examination results showed that she had been hit multiple times in the head. Her body was found with severe injuries, including heavy bleeding on the right side of her tongue and 5 cuts around her neck, indicating that she had been strangled. After Valentina's murder, the police began questioning her friends and relatives. They started asking questions about Valentina's relationships. As a famous DJ with a hot body, she was a very popular and well-connected person. Among those questioned, a friend of Valentina's expressed concern and suspected Valentina's boyfriend, John Poulos, of being involved in the case because of his excessively jealous behavior. At this point, suspicions turned to Valentina's boyfriend, John, and a closer investigation into him was launched. The police initially relied on surveillance cameras around John's home, examining his actions on the days of the crime. John Poulos arrived in Bogotá at approximately 8:53 p.m. on January 19th. Surveillance cameras recorded him entering the apartment with a blue suitcase identical to the one used to contain Valentina's body. This information made John the first suspect to come to the attention of the police, as he was also the last person to see Valentina alive. When detectives attempted to contact John, the call was routed to voicemail. Valentina's family had appreciated John's calm and kind personality, and they did not think he was involved in this terrible crime, especially since John and Valentina had a wedding planned. Suspicions about John grew when investigators visited his rental apartment. There, they discovered that John had left and was nowhere to be found on Monday, January 23rd. It is worth noting that John Poulos deleted his social media pages early in the morning after Valentina's death, making him the only suspect at the time. Investigators analyzed surveillance camera footage in the building from Friday evening to early Sunday morning. This helped them clarify the events that took place. The Colombian police and the prosecutor's office also reviewed several hours of video footage from cameras in the area where Valentina and John were. Camera footage and WhatsApp conversations played a key role in uncovering Valentina's final hours. Valentina and John were scheduled to meet on January 20th. John arrived on the 19th, cleaned the apartment they would share, and then texted Valentina. Valentina and John began arguing that night because Valentina was partying while he was away. John questioned whether Valentina was with any men. Valentina refused to answer, believing he was jealous and suspicious. John eventually reminded Valentina to meet on the 20th. Before the meeting, Valentina planned to visit some beauty salons for eyelash and hair extensions to feel more confident. However, on the 20th, Valentina and John disagreed about the date and only clarified their plans when surveillance cameras recorded activities at Valentina's apartment that evening. According to the surveillance cameras, on the 20th, John helped Valentina pack her luggage at 6 p.m. when the two moved into their new home. Valentina also made a video call to her mother and said she would return after the trip. The video also showed Valentina with John Poulos, who had rented a car to transport Valentina's belongings. Valentina and John were caught on surveillance footage entering her new apartment at 7 p.m. Valentina and John were caught on camera engaging in some activities before heading home. It was Saturday, January 21st, at 1 a.m. They took a taxi to a nightclub in Southeast New York where Valentina was performing. When they arrived at the nightclub around 4 a.m., Valentina immediately started working. John Poulos stayed with her while she got ready. At around 5 a.m., Valentina's performance ended, and they then went into the club's office to meet the owner, his wife, and a companion. Valentina and John left the club around 6 a.m. That was the last time Valentina's friends saw her. She walked out of the club smiling and seemingly fine. Valentina reached out to a friend by phone on Saturday and said she had no plans to go anywhere. She planned to stay home with John and perhaps go out to dinner or cook together. Valentina's last conversation with her friend was via video at 9 p.m. Valentina's mother, Laura Hidalgo, said her 13-year-old son was the last person to talk to Valentina via video. Valentina was lying in bed with John, and they appeared happy. The family has no further information about their situation. On January 21st, at 10:43 p.m., surveillance cameras in the building recorded Valentina and John. Valentina was looking out of the apartment door while John stood in front of it, looking pensive, pacing back and forth, and occasionally grimacing. John was again caught on camera on Sunday, January 22nd, at 9 a.m. This time, he left the room with 2 bags of trash, and Valentina was not seen. John then drove to the parking lot, picked up a silver car, and put the bags in the back seat. Next, he returned to the apartment, took 2 suitcases from the trunk, and brought them back to the apartment. At the apartment, a gray blanket was placed on top of the suitcase that John had taken out. It was 10 a.m. He put this suitcase on the cart for transport. A second bag was placed next to it, and in this bag was Valentina's head wrapped in a blanket. Before leaving, John observed the parking lot after parking and noticed that there was no one nearby. He also checked the area around the elevator to make sure no one was getting off. Then he quickly returned to the car and tried to lift the heavy suitcase into the trunk. Finally, he took the bag and put it in the car, then drove away. The surveillance camera recorded the car circulating at various points in the city. Around noon, John appeared to be looking for a safe place to dump the suitcase. The car then pulled into a parking lot and parked near a dumpster. At 3 p.m., John got out of the car, looked around to see if anyone was following him, then took out the suitcase, which appeared to be very heavy, and threw it into the dumpster. He then returned to the car, took out a bag, and placed it in the dumpster before closing the lid and exiting the parking lot. The car then traveled west until it reached El Dorado International Airport, where John was last seen at 4:30 p.m. The Department of Homeland Security announced a $1 million reward on Monday, January 23rd, for information leading to the arrest of John Tres Palacios. Colombian authorities sought Interpol's assistance in issuing an arrest warrant for John as he fled the country's borders. On January 24th, Panamanian National Police arrested John at El Dorado International Airport, just as he was preparing to leave for Turkey. Colombian authorities quickly began the process of deporting John from the country after Valentina's death. More than 14 criminal investigators were involved in the investigation, gathering evidence to clarify the truth. The result of this investigation included the analysis of more than 300 hours of video footage from security cameras, conducted in cooperation with the Public Prosecutor's Office. An important discovery in the case was the finding of Valentina's cell phone near El Dorado International Airport. A security guard happened to see the phone on the grass while walking near a gas station and picked it up. After realizing that the phone did not have a SIM card, he took it home with the intention of selling it, not knowing it belonged to Valentina. However, the security guard's wife called him after realizing that the photo of the girl on the phone's wallpaper matched the photos seen on social media, as well as the photo of the young woman found dead in the trash. Unfortunately, the phone was put up for sale and repackaged because someone wanted to buy it. After leaving the nightclub, John and Valentina's driver gave his statement. The driver had been assigned to take Valentina and John to a nightclub in the south of the city. When John stopped for a moment, Valentina got into the car and shouted that she had written something. When the driver looked at her, Valentina seemed uncertain, and the driver checked his phone. The driver discovered that Valentina had warned him that she was in danger in a Spanish text message to customer service. John then asked Valentina if she was okay. While the car was being driven, John and Valentina conversed in English. The driver asked them if they were bilingual, and they answered yes. When they left around 4 a.m. that same day, the driver went to the nightclub with the couple. He then knew nothing about the incident until he was informed of Valentina's death a few days later. In the WhatsApp version open on Valentina's computer, a friend of Valentina's in Caragana provided the prosecutor's office in Bogotá with conversations on Valentina's computer, which offered clues about what happened. One of the key pieces of evidence found in the investigation of Valentina's case was a discovery by one of her friends, who found the suitcase containing her body. This suitcase was believed to have been in the same location as Valentina's. The friend also said that on the day Valentina was in Bogotá, she received messages from John Poulos and several selfies of him with the luggage. The suitcase John was carrying was very similar to the one investigators found in the case, though the color was indistinguishable. While it is unclear why Valentina left the WhatsApp session open on her friend's computer, the messages helped investigators understand what happened at night when Valentina was killed. Forensic investigators determined that she died of asphyxiation due to being strangled with a rope. There were also signs of violence on her body. The autopsy revealed that Valentina died in her sleep. Criminologists came to this conclusion because she was wearing pajamas. All the evidence pointed to John Poulos being present at the scene. However, in the indictment, John did not admit responsibility for Valentina's death. He argued that his arrest in Panama was illegal because he did not have a lawyer to assist him. John was not proficient enough in Spanish, and a translator was not present during the 5-hour hearing. John was charged with involvement in Valentina's death and deleted his social media accounts. John Poulos was born on May 19, 1987, in Wisconsin, USA. He is married and has 3 children. However, he also has a criminal record related to violence against women, including a restraining order from his ex-wife. One of the women who had a relationship with John Poulos revealed that he frequently visited pornographic websites, spending up to 5 to 6 hours a day on them. She also commented that John often exhibited strange behavior, such as fantasizing in telling ghost stories. Another model who interacted with John Poulos on social media said that she knew him as being from Texas, USA. She stopped contacting him after he made a strange comment, including the words jealous and death. Specifically, John asked her, "If I was at a bar, would you be willing to talk to me?" When the woman refused, John replied, "There's a chance one of us will die of jealousy." The woman also said that although John donated money to her, she never chatted with him via video because his communication style was often erratic. It's important to note that John also displayed some suspicious behavior towards Valentina. He contacted Valentina on social media and began sending her money persistently and consistently. In this case, treating women like property was a red flag that the women overlooked, and they initially trusted him. John thought he could buy their trust with money from the start. Authorities investigating the case believe that John Poulos thought that the waste disposal system in Colombia was similar to that in the United States, where he lived. In his mind, the waste would settle in a container and eventually be disposed of. However, Poulos overlooked the fact that recyclers and people living on the streets regularly rummage through trash looking for items they can sell or use. John Poulos is currently being held in a separate cell in Bogotá. The next step is to prove that all the evidence links him to the crime and to find the real motive behind this horrific murder in Colombia. The criminal code stipulates a prison sentence of up to 50 years for the crime John was charged with. John Poulos was subsequently sentenced to 42 years and 8 months in prison, was banned from approaching or attempting to contact the Tres Palacios family for 20 years, and was ordered to be deported from Colombia after serving his sentence. John's defense team said they would appeal the verdict. They argued that John was innocent of Valentina's murder. Valentina's situation is similar to many others. She thought she had found true love, but it turned out to be a mistake. Does anyone feel safe connecting with strangers on social media? Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lucy Davis. Lucy Davis was born in 1971 in the picturesque town of Penimpryd, Wales. Her childhood was filled with love and warmth, thanks to her parents, Roger and Andre, who created a happy and comfortable home. Lucy grew up in the beautiful village of Glenk with her younger sister, Anna. Lucy took her first steps surrounded by majestic mountains and enchanting forests. Her kind nature and charming smile make her stand out, becoming a dynamic and special individual among those around her. Lucy easily gained the sympathy of her teachers and classmates. She developed a passion for horseback riding at a young age and had an endless love for horses. Seeing how eager Lucy was, her father arranged for her and her younger sister to take horse riding lessons with experienced instructors. They mastered the basics of this noble art, conquering challenges and overcoming obstacles. Lucy and Anna became skilled horse riders. Lucy Davis had a wonderful childhood in Wales, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the love of family and community, which helped her grow and develop. Lucy and Anna developed a passion for horse riding, which not only brought them companions but also taught them valuable life skills such as discipline, self-control, and responsibility. Their talent and perseverance earned them recognition at prestigious competitions, where they won multiple awards. However, Lucy's interests extended beyond horse riding. With a curious mind and a desire for knowledge, Lucy explored other passions, including music. She took flute and piano lessons, diligently honing her skills, and within a year, she had mastered both instruments, captivating audiences with her performances. This led to her joining the Glamorgan Youth Orchestra, where she continued to refine her musical talents. Lucy also participates in the school choir, which allows her to express her creativity and love of music. Lucy Davis's childhood was a balance of fun and dedication, marked by hard work and eager to learn. These qualities formed a strong base that would support her future successes and help her become an extraordinary person. In high school, Lucy became close friends with Garrick Jenkinson, a quiet and enigmatic young man from Wales. Despite not knowing much about his background, but they developed a strong and lasting connection. Garrett and Lucy became closer friends as time passed. However, Garrett secretly harbored romantic feelings for Lucy. After graduating from high school in 1998, Lucy pursued her passion for music and enrolled at the University of Yorkshire in Northern England. She initially aspired to become a music teacher but later realized her true desire was to create art in a major city. This realization led Lucy to meet Grimmy McAllister, whose perspective and humor aligned with hers. As their connection grew, Lucy introduced Grimmy to her parents, Roger and Andre. The introduction was a success, and Lucy's parents saw Grimmy as an ideal partner for their daughter. After careful consideration, Lucy and Grimmy chose to live together and start a family. In 1995, while in college, the couple had a son named James and Anne. To care for their child, Lucy took a break from her studies, while Grimmy continued his education and worked night shifts at the postal sorting department to support their family. Despite the challenges she faced, Lucy was hopeful about their future, driven by her love for her family and her aspirations for a better life. However, spending months at home with the baby took a toll on her, and she began to feel lonely. The fact that she and Grimmy rarely spent time together, due to his night shifts, made the problem even worse. Seeking companionship and someone to talk to, Lucy created a social media account under the nickname Miseria. This virtual outlet allowed her to share her experiences and connect with others. One user in particular caught her attention, Harold Landry, a 53 years old, he from Louisiana who had grown up in poverty and was fixated on achieving independence and success. Harold put in a lot of work and eventually came to an important insight. He understood that real wealth came not from owning oil wells, but from providing the essential tools and machinery needed to keep them running. With this insight, he founded a company that specializes in manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As his business thrived, Harold's fortunes grew, earning him not only financial security but also prestige and, eventually, the status of a billionaire. For Lucy, conversing with Harold was invigorating. She was captivated by his life experiences, dedication, and generosity. However, their relationship was not without its challenges. The significant gaps in their age, social standing, and lifestyle often caused friction between them. When Harold and Lucy first met, Harold's life seemed to be a confusing combination of luxury in many different experiences. He indulged in unusual hobbies, acquired luxury items, and owned real estate on KML Island in Mexico. There is no information about his previous marriages. He was married and divorced twice, but it is not known whether he had children from these marriages. Harold's life underwent a major transformation in 1992. Following his second divorce, he met Geraldine, a woman 20 years his junior, born in 1966 and originally from Mexico. At the time, Geraldine was married to Chris Price and had 2 children. Despite Geraldine being married, but Harold successfully captured her heart. On February 6, 1994, Harold planned a romantic dinner for Geraldine in New Orleans. They employed Christian Hurton as a babysitter for their children, giving them the opportunity to enjoy a romantic evening by themselves, free from childcare responsibilities. After dinner, Harold walked Geraldine home and then offered to drive Christian home as a thank you. Unbeknownst to Harold, Chris Price, Geraldine's husband, had been monitoring the couple's secret affair. Chris, who was watching from his car, decided to confront Harold. He chased after him, finally catching up at a red light. Chris rushed towards Harold, shouting accusations. Harold remained calm, pulled out a gun, and warned Chris to back off. Enraged, Chris dared Harold to shoot. Without hesitation, Harold fired, hitting Chris in the neck. Fortunately, Chris received prompt medical treatment from a nearby hospital, and which saved his life. In 1997, Harold was tried in St. Mary Parish Court for the attempted murder of Chris Price. His lawyer, Pete Fannin, argued that Harold was a victim of a setup. The jury found Harold guilty of aggravated assault with a weapon, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after appealing, Harold was released on parole, required to pay a fine and perform community service. Harold was thankful to Pete for his assistance and they formed a friendship. Harold and Chris reached a settlement, but the details of the compensation were kept private. Harold then lived in Covington as a wealthy man, openly discussing his past with Lucy, including his previous failed marriages and a traumatic incident. Lucy became more attracted to Harold after he shared his secrets. She was captivated by his persuasive nature. After Lucy ended her relationship with Grimmy, she and Harold chose to start dating. To shield them from unwanted issues, Harold aimed to steer clear of trouble. In early 2000, Harold visited England to meet Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre. Although they were initially surprised by the age gap, they supported their daughter's decision and didn't meddle in the relationship. Harold gave Lucy many costly presents because he wanted to fulfill all her wishes. His love was intense, and he contemplated marriage, but wanted everything to be flawless. Harold plans a trip to Mexico to strengthen his relationship, inviting Lucy, her son James, and her ex-husband Grimmy to join them on this special journey. Mexico was a paradise for Harold, and having his friend and lawyer Pete's apartment nearby added to the trip's comfort. Harold had recently bought a diamond engagement ring and shared the news with Pete. However, Pete suspected Lucy was cheating on Harold due to her frequent meetings with Grimmy. Despite Pete's warnings, Harold proposed to Lucy, blinded by his love for her. she accepted his proposal. In mid-2003, Harold and Lucy got married. Harold purchased $1 million home in Warshire County, and they started a new life together. Their neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, were friendly and helped them feel welcome in the area. After the wedding, Lucy gave birth to a daughter named Harth. Harold also welcomed James, Lucy's son from her previous marriage, into their family and treated him as his own. Over time, Lucy and Harold's relationship began to deteriorate. Harold became increasingly controlling, expecting Lucy to obey him completely. However, Lucy was an independent person and refused to comply with Harold's demands. As a result, arguments and disagreements became more frequent, creating a tense atmosphere at home. Their son, James, had a difficult and unhappy childhood due to his family's stressful environment. Lucy and Harold's relationship was deteriorating, and their neighbors took notice. The situation was made worse by their growing reliance on alcohol, which added to their existing problems. However, when the arguing and shouting stopped, neighbors thought the couple was trying to resolve their issues. In 2009, Lucy reconnected with her old school friend Garrett on social media. Their online conversations became a source of comfort for Lucy during a difficult time in her life. As Harold sensed Lucy's growing distance, he realized she was seeking solace in another man. Not wanting to confront the situation, Harold left for Mexico, leaving Lucy alone. During his absence, Lucy invited Garrett to visit. Harold was surprised when he got home. Shortly after, Lucy filed for divorce. And Harold began an affair with their neighbor, Rachel. Harold and Lucy's divorce proceedings were complicated by disagreements over dividing their assets. Lucy wanted to keep the family home for the sake of their children, while Harold was adamant that they sell it and offered her a financial settlement instead. The situation between Lucy and Harold became increasingly heated, and Lucy revealed some of Harold's past secrets. When Lucy returns home, the arguments continue, and the tension between her and Harold causes Jameson and Harth much suffering. On the evening of Monday, February 1, 2010, Harold was drinking wine when a package intended for his neighbor, Stephen Kennedy, was mistakenly delivered to his address. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Stephen stopped by Harold's house to collect his package after noticing the delivery notification. Upon arriving, Stephen was greeted by Harold, then Harold offered him a glass of wine. Although Harold had already been drinking and was visibly intoxicated, Stephen accepted the offer. After a brief visit, during which he collected his package and exchanged greetings with Lucy, and Stephen left. Harold and Lucy's argument soon resumed, this time centering on Lucy's plans to buy furniture for her new home. James rushed into the kitchen after hearing a commotion and witnessed Harold physically abusing his mother with a kitchen utensil. James immediately called the police and comforted his younger sister. Meanwhile, Lucy grabbed the children and attempted to escape the house, heading to Stephen's residence in search of help. However, Harold caught up with her during the escape and violently attacked her with a knife, stabbing her in the chest. He then dragged her body under a nearby bush, attempting to conceal the crime. Upon hearing the screams, Stephen rushed outside and discovered Lucy's lifeless body. Initially, he thought she had fainted, but soon realized the gravity of the situation. Police officer Steve C. Fox arrived at the crime scene and immediately called for an ambulance. He then began searching the neighborhood for Harold, but unfortunately, he was unable to find Harold. The children, traumatized and frightened, hid in the house until the police arrived. A tragic incident drastically altered the family's life, leading to a prolonged and challenging struggle for justice. An ambulance quickly arrived and transported Lucy to Yorkshire Hospital, but unfortunately, she succumbed after to the hospital. At the same time, a fearful Harold knocked on his friend Rachel's door, his voice shaking. He confessed to doing something terrible, but didn't reveal what it was. Harold then gave Rachel a large sum of money, $40,000, along with all his cash, car keys, and paychecks. After that, he headed home. Meanwhile, the police were searching for Harold. They scoured the streets, interviewed witnesses, but he seemed to have vanished. However, luck eventually turned in the detectives' favor, and Harold was arrested on his way back from Rachel's house. His face, filled with fear and remorse, was telling. Lucy's family, including her parents Roger and Andre, were overcome with grief. In a statement to the press, they expressed their profound sorrow at the loss of their daughter and chose not to make any additional comments. The forensic examination confirmed that Lucy died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. The investigation relied heavily on evidence discovered at the crime scene and a key eyewitness account from James, Lucy's son, who saw the tragic event unfold. February 24, 2011, was a day of tension in the courtroom, as everyone waited anxiously for the verdict in the trial of 64-year-old Harold Landry, who was accused of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy. The jury had just delivered their guilty verdict, and the air was thick with bitterness and loss. Harold should have been Lucy's rock and protector, stood accused of her murder. His lawyer and friend, Pete, had passed the case to experienced attorney Andy Child, who faced an uphill battle in defending Harold. The defense's task was to convince the court that Harold never intended to take Lucy's life. The defense claimed that Harold acted in response to Lucy's aggressive behavior. Overcome with emotion, Harold swore he loved his wife and was consumed by remorse, insisting he never meant to hurt her. As part of his defense strategy, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection with Lucy's death. However, the prosecution presented damning evidence, including disturbing photographs of multiple wounds on Lucy's body. The brutality of Harold's attack left no doubt about his guilt. After a thorough review of the evidence, the court delivered its verdict. Harold Landry was found guilty of Lucy's death and sentenced to life in prison. He must serve 16 years before being eligible for parole, at which point he will be 82 years old. The story of Harold and Lucy is a tragic love story. Although the trial is over, the consequences of this tragedy still linger. Lucy's parents, Roger and Andre, felt that the verdict was fair, but it did not alleviate their grief. Meanwhile, Harold Landry maintained his innocence and vowed to appeal the decision. He claimed that he would not change anything, even with the benefit of hindsight. Harold has been held accountable for his actions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lynette White. Lynette White was a beautiful young woman from Cardiff, Wales. Due to difficult circumstances, she had to support herself through prostitution since she was 14 years old. Although this was not Lynette's childhood dream, it was the path she was forced to choose. Before her murder, Lynette had given an interview to BBC Wales journalist Tim Rogers, who was investigating child prostitution. In this conversation, Lynette shared how she had been abused, taken to Bristol, and forced into prostitution. Although Lynette managed to return to Cardiff, she was still unable to escape this dangerous life. By 1988, when Lynette was 20 years old, she had become a well-known prostitute on the streets of Cardiff. With her beautiful appearance and high regard among her friends, Lynette was one of the top prostitutes in the city. She went to work every day, earning around £100 a night. People often thought that Lynette White was trying her best to make a better life, but the reality was quite different. She worked hard just to pay for her boyfriend Stephen Miller's cocaine addiction. Every day, Stephen took large amounts of money from Lynette, who was his only source of income. Lynette and Stephen lived together in a flat on Dorset Street, Cardiff. Every day, Stephen drove Lynette to work in Riverside, Cardiff, and then went to the North Star Club in the evening to collect her earnings. Lynette's life took a new turn when Leanne, a friend of Lynette's, lent her the keys to a flat. The purpose of this was for Lynette to take clients there for sex. On the evening of February 14, 1988, Leanne went to the flat as she presumably wanted to use it. However, when she got there, Leanne found the door locked, which was quite unusual. Leanne became very concerned about Lynette and went to Buttetown Police Station to report her missing. The police went with Leanne to her James Street flat. They entered the flat and found Lynette lying in a pool of her own blood. She had died from severe injuries. A post-mortem examination by forensic pathologist Bernard Knight revealed that Lynette had been stabbed more than 50 times in various parts of her body, including her chest, face, abdomen, wrists, arms, hands, and thighs. In particular, her throat had been brutally slashed from ear to ear. Although Lynette had been stabbed multiple times, her cause of death was the injury to her throat. The medical examiner determined that Lynette was murdered on February 14, between 1:45 a.m. and 4 a.m. Lynette's body was found between the foot of her bed and the window, covered in blood. An autopsy revealed that semen containing no sperm was found in Lynette's vagina and on her underwear. Additionally, 2 different blood types were found on Lynette, including her own blood and blood type AB, which was not Lynette's. After news of Lynette's death spread, police began to investigate the case further. Several witnesses reported seeing a distressed man in the area near where Lynette's body was found on James Street. The man looked suspicious and appeared to have blood on his hands. The suspicious man was described as a white man, about 5 feet 10 inches tall and in his mid-30s. Police focused their search on him and eventually arrested a man matching the description. However, he was released after providing an alibi. Police also investigated Stephen, Lynette's boyfriend, as the victim's partner is often the first suspect. Stephen was questioned but was later released because his blood type did not match the blood type found on Lynette. In addition, the police also investigated Francine Cordell and his mother because Lynette was scheduled to testify against Francine in court in an unrelated case. However, both were also ruled out as suspects because their blood did not match the AB blood type found on Lynette. With no leads, the police had to rely on statements collected from the house-to-house investigation. In particular, 2 people gave suspicious statements. They were Mark Gromick, who lived in the apartment above where Lynette was murdered, and his friend, Paul Atkins. In their testimonies, Mark and Paul gave 4 completely different statements. Therefore, the investigators did not take these statements seriously. The police collected more statements related to Lynette's murder. Ronnie Williams, a police informant, gave statements implicating his brother-in-law, Yusef Abdullahi. However, the strained relationship between Ronnie and Yusef led the police to doubt and dismiss this account. Leanne Vilde, who reported Lynette missing on the day of her death, was also a suspect. After intense questioning, she gave a drunken statement naming Stephen and Yusef as the killers. Another eyewitness, Violet Piriam, a secretary at the Cardiff Yacht Club, shed light on the case. 8 months into the investigation, she recalled a crucial detail. On February 14th, while driving home from the club at around 1:30 a.m., she saw 4 excited black men outside the building where Lynette was killed. 2 of them, in particular, she identified as John Akhti and Rashid Omar. Piriam's testimony opened a new line of inquiry into the case. Angela Sila, who has a mild intellectual disability, gave a crucial testimony. She said she saw Stephen, John, Rashid, Ronnie Akhti, John's cousin Tony Paris, and Tony Brace outside 7 James Street on the day Lynette was murdered. This testimony was important because it matched Violet's testimony and further implicated Yusef, John Stephen, and others. On the same day, Mark and Paul also provided new testimony. They said they saw a group of men, including Ronnie and Yusef. Angela Sila then gave another testimony in December 1988. She said she heard screams from Lynette's flat and ran there with Leanne. Leanne gave a similar testimony on the same day, saying she went to the flat after hearing Lynette's screams and met Stephen, Youssef, Ronnie Acti, Stephen's brother, and an unnamed mixed-race man. However, Angela Sila later got into trouble. She had type AB blood, and police found her blood on Lynette's socks. Sila later gave a new confession, admitting that she was part of the murder, along with Leanne and others. Leanne also admitted that she was forced to cut Lynette's wrists to ensure her complicity and silence. With no way out, Stephen confessed to killing Lynette after 307 denials. He also named other men involved, leading to the arrest of all those accused of the murder. Specifically, the police arrested Stephen Miller, Tony Stephen, Youssef Abdullahi, Ronnie Acti, Rashid Omar, and Martin Tucker on December 7, 1988. 2 days later, John Acti and Tony Paris were also arrested. After nearly a year in custody, their trial began on October 5, 1989 at Swansea Crown Court. It was the longest murder trial in British legal history, lasting 197 days. After 2 years in custody, Ronnie Acti and John Acti were acquitted of murder. Meanwhile, Tony Paris, Stephen Miller, and Youssef Abdullahi were convicted. Each was sentenced to life imprisonment and was known as the Cardiff Three. However, there was no forensic evidence linking the men to the crime scene, which created many doubts and questions about the verdict. Friends and family of the Cardiff Three began a campaign to overturn the verdict. The campaign received widespread support and was followed up by television documentaries in 1992. The Cardiff Three's appeal was finally accepted in December 1992. After hearing Stephen's interrogation, Judge Taylor decided that the police had been abusive in their questioning of Stephen. Therefore, the veracity of Stephen's testimony was no longer important. In the end, the Cardiff Three were acquitted. Their conviction was deemed unsafe and insufficiently supported. However, if the Cardiff Three were not the real criminals, then the real criminal is still at large. This raises the question, who killed Lynette White? 8 years later, the case was reopened. This time, Professor Dave Barkley and Police Chief Kevin O'Neill were assigned to investigate. The case led the police back to the crime scene, where the incident had occurred 12 years earlier. While reviewing old photos of the crime scene, Professor Barkley discovered a crucial detail that no one else had seen all these years: a large drop of blood that might have been splattered from a knife onto the wallpaper. When the crime occurred in 1988, the police had collected several pieces of wallpaper from the apartment as evidence. Upon searching through the old evidence, they discovered that the only missing piece of wallpaper was the one containing the large drop of blood. The forensic team continued to investigate the case, carefully studying photos of the scene. They discovered that the blood might have been hidden under several layers of paint on the baseboards. The team also found traces of blood on a piece of cellophane from a cigarette packet, leading to the suspect being nicknamed Cellophane Man. To find the suspect, the forensic team led by Angela Gallup began collecting and comparing DNA data. However, searching for a matching DNA profile in 140 police databases proved futile as no matches were found. But the forensic team did not give up. They narrowed down the search to hundreds of profiles in the Cardiff area by comparing similar DNA profiles. They eventually found a match between the suspect's DNA profile and that of a 14-year-old boy who was known to the police for driving around Cardiff. Surprisingly, the boy could not be a suspect because he had not been born at the time of the crime 15 years ago. The police still visited the boy's home to investigate. There, they were told that the boy's father had died but that he had an uncle named Jeffrey Gafford. On February 26, 2003, detectives went to Jeffrey's home in the village of Hanharan, 15 miles west of Cardiff. However, Jeffrey's house was empty at the time. The next morning, police went to his workplace in an office building in Cardiff city centre. When they explained the purpose of their visit, Jeffrey said, "I think you've got someone for the job." Jeffrey was then asked to provide a mouth swab, which he agreed to do. The police immediately analyzed the swab and identified a clue that would lead to the murderer. The next morning, Superintendent Kevin O'Neill wanted to get things right so there would be no more mistakes. He assigned a team to watch Jeffrey before he began interviewing him. Chief O'Neill had planned to monitor Jeffrey for a week, but on February 28, 2003, Jeffrey attempted suicide. When the surveillance team caught him in a garage, where he had bought 3 packets of paracetamol, the police immediately took action. When the police arrived at Jeffrey's home, he had taken approximately 62 paracetamol tablets, a significant amount of painkillers. Despite this, Jeffrey tried to hide his actions. When questioned, he made a horrifying confession: "I killed Lynette White. I've been waiting for this for 15 years. I think I deserve this sentence. I really hope to die." Jeffrey was then taken to the hospital, where he once again confessed to the murder he had committed 15 years earlier. Initially refusing treatment, Jeffrey prepared himself to accept death. But he eventually agreed to take the antidote and recovered within a few days. On July 4, 2003, Jeffrey pleaded guilty to the murder of Lynette White in court. Judge Royce sentenced Jeffrey to life imprisonment with a minimum of 12 years and 8 months. Jeffrey's lawyer later revealed that Jeffrey had killed Lynette for over 30 pounds and had sexually assaulted her body. In February 2007, Paul Atkins, Angela Sila, Leanne Vilde, and Mark Gromick were charged with perjury. By December 2008, 3 of them, Angela Sila, Leanne Vilde, and Mark Gromick, were convicted and each sentenced to 18 months in prison. However, Paul Atkins was acquitted because it was believed he had been bullied, threatened, abused, and manipulated into making false statements. In March 2009, it was announced that the prosecution had enough evidence to charge the officers involved in the original investigation for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. However, in 2011, the trial was dropped due to a lack of evidence. In 2015, 8 of the accused officers brought a civil suit in the High Court against the police force, suing for malicious prosecution, unlawful detention, and wrongful conduct. However, in late 2015, the judge in the civil case dismissed their case. 5 of the wrongfully accused men were awarded compensation after their release. Stephen Miller was paid £571,000, John Actie received £300,000, while Tony Paris was awarded £250,000. 2 other men, Ron Actie and Yusuf Abdullahi, have since died. Ronnie Actie died in 2007 after struggling to come to terms with what had happened to him. Yusuf Abdullahi died in 2011 from cancer after battling post-traumatic stress disorder. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Judy Blake Morlannon. Judy Blake was born on October 16, 1957, in Hancock, Michigan, into a conservative family. As the only daughter, Judy was loved dearly by her parents and 2 older brothers. Her parents, Dale and Marianne, were active members of the Redeemer Free Lutheran Church and also ran a successful business called Dale Service. Through this, they provided Judy with a comfortable life in a warm environment. In 1974, Judy met Bruce Morlannon. Both worked in the healthcare industry, with Judy as a nurse and Bruce as a support worker. The age difference was only 3 years, yet the two were complete opposites. While Judy was shy and gentle, Bruce was outgoing and confident. Judy's family was a little apprehensive about Bruce, but love helped Judy and Bruce convince their families, and they got married in 1978. In the following years, Judy's family tried to accept and make Bruce an integral part of her life. It seemed to work because Bruce got along well with Judy's family. Another happy turning point came in 1989 when Judy gave birth to their daughter, Elise. However, the joy and peace in their family life were short-lived. On November 29, 1992, after Thanksgiving, Judy and Bruce visited Judy's family and brought Elise with them. It was also the last day of hunting season in the Upper Peninsula. Bruce and Judy's brothers went into the nearby woods to hunt deer on Sunday morning, while Judy stayed at home with her mother and Elise. Judy took her Springer Spaniel and her parents' dog, Streak, for a walk in the woods behind the Blake home on Highway 38 in Ontonagon County, Michigan. When Judy's mother, Mary Ann, said goodbye to her daughter, she had no idea it would be the last time she would see her. 2.5 hours passed without Judy, and Mary Ann became worried. Although Judy was familiar with the woods, the possibility of an accident or trouble was concerning, especially since hunting was still ongoing. A neighbor joined Mary Ann in searching for Judy. As it grew dark, the two women had difficulty following Judy's footprints along the trail. After nearly an hour of searching, Mary Ann came across a terrifying sight. On one of the trails in the woods, Mary Ann saw Judy lying motionless. The dogs were still circling the area. When they tried to turn Judy over, they found a terrible wound and bleeding in her chest, indicating that Judy was no longer alive. When Mary Ann discovered Judy's death, she ran home and reported the incident to the local authorities. Investigators soon determined that Judy had died from a gunshot wound. Although the night was getting colder, the police decided to search the woods with flashlights in hand. However, after searching the entire area, they still did not find many clues, including the bullet that killed Judy. However, they did find one important trace, a burn mark on a maple tree. Detective Bob Ball, who was in charge of the case, believed that the burn mark could have been caused by the bullet that killed Judy. He hoped that if the bullet was found, it would shed some light on the case. Forensic tests later confirmed that the burn mark was indeed caused by a bullet. Based on the position of the body in the burn marks, investigators concluded that the bullet struck Judy first, passed through her heart, exited her body through her left side, hit a tree, and eventually landed somewhere in the woods. Initially, the incident was ruled a tragic accident. Investigators believed that a stray bullet from an unknown hunter killed Judy, which was not unusual in the area. However, determining who was responsible for Judy's death was a difficult task, as bullets from high-powered rifles can often travel 3 miles or more. Most of the time, hunters don't realize that their bullets have killed a person. While Judy's body is being taken to the medical examiner's office, the detectives begin interviewing family members. Everyone seems deeply saddened by the tragedy, but an unusual statement from Bruce makes Detective Bob uncomfortable. Bruce criticizes Judy for not being more careful. Bruce becomes a suspect because, in most brutal cases, the person closest to the victim is usually the suspect. However, Detective Bob also knows that Bruce may just be a husband trying to hide his grief. Bruce's brothers claim that Bruce was with them all day, and they are certain that he had nothing to do with Judy's death. They are even unhappy with the police for considering Bruce a suspect. After 2 days, the autopsy report reveals an important detail about the time of death, estimating it at around 3 p.m. When Detective Bob returns to interview Judy's family again with this new information, Bruce's relatives reveal that although Bruce was with them for most of the day, they did not see him at a particular time. Judy's family, however, remains completely convinced of his innocence. They believe the investigation is flawed in accusing a man who is still grieving the loss of his wife. However, they do not know that the detectives have their own reasons for believing that Judy's death was not an accident. By analyzing the trajectory of the bullet and forensic evidence, investigators find that the bullet entered the body at an upward angle. This is a significant finding because if Judy had been shot by a hunter, the bullet would have entered the body at a downward angle. This raises the suspicion that Judy's death was a targeted murder. However, one question remains: was the killer really Bruce? To verify their suspicions, the detectives decide to summon Bruce for a thorough investigation. On December 11, 1992, just 12 days after the investigation began, Bruce is invited to the sheriff's office for a formal interview. After a brief interview with Detective Bob, Bruce recounts in detail where he had been on the day his wife died and provides the names of nearly 30 people who witnessed his presence that day. However, there is a suspicious 30-minute gap in Bruce's itinerary on the day of the incident that he cannot explain. Despite his repeated claims of having nothing to do with his wife's death, this gap causes Detective Bob to begin questioning what Bruce might be hiding. The truth about Bruce's guilt remains unclear, but his behavior raises suspicions. After his wife's death, Bruce does not spend much time on the funeral. Over the following weeks, he goes skiing, hangs out with friends, and even flirts with some of his deceased wife's friends instead of taking care of his daughter. This causes Judy's family to begin suspecting Bruce, although they initially supported him. Bruce's behavior is the cause of this suspicion. The police are actively investigating the case but have not yet found any concrete evidence against him. To gain information, Detective Bob asks some of Bruce's friends and colleagues to secretly follow him and report back to the police if they see anything suspicious. This method of surveillance reveals an important detail. One of the people asked to follow Bruce is Gail, a 35-year-old colleague. She has a remarkable story to tell the detectives about Bruce. Shortly after the funeral, Bruce shows up uninvited at Gail's house, carrying 5 boxes filled with his deceased wife's belongings. After placing the boxes on Gail's porch, Bruce left before Gail could ask for more information. Since it was the holidays, Gail left the boxes outside for a while without paying attention to them. When she opened the boxes, she discovered that most of them were filled with Judy's clothes. But in one of the boxes, under the pile of clothes, Gail found a letter written 6 months earlier and signed by Judy. Finding this letter was a surprise to Gail, as she had only met Judy once. What was even stranger was the content of the letter. The letter began with Judy's request that Gail keep her old clothes as a souvenir, as she believed that Gail was the only person Bruce trusted. The letter then went into many intimate details about Bruce and Judy's marriage, about why they were no longer compatible and were on the verge of divorce. The letter even mentioned that Bruce needed a new girlfriend. The strangest thing about the letter was that the writer ended by praising Bruce's ability in bed. The letter immediately made Gail feel that something was wrong. The detectives felt the same way. To verify the authenticity of the letter, they showed it to forensic examiner James Stegall. He was tasked with comparing the letter to a sample of Judy's handwriting to see if it was really written by Judy. Handwriting analysis revealed that the handwriting in the letter indicated the speed of the writer, appearing slow and deliberate, which could be a sign of forgery. Judy was ruled out as the author of the letter, but it was also impossible to definitively confirm that the handwriting was Bruce's. With no conclusive evidence against Bruce, the detectives had to rely on limited resources to find more information. Detective Bob decided to continue interviewing Gail. Gail revealed that Bruce had been trying to get her attention for a long time, even before Judy's death. However, Gail, who is happily married, only sees Bruce as a nuisance. Bruce constantly flirts, but Gail deliberately ignores him and hopes he will give up. Gail is not the only one who dislikes Bruce. No one has a good word to say about him. At work, he often flirts with other female employees, causing everyone to try to stay away. His colleagues complain that he is difficult to work with. Gail also reveals that after his wife passed away, he bragged about being rich. According to Gail, this was just his attempt to seduce her. This information makes Detective Bob interested in investigating Bruce's marriage. They speculate that Bruce and Judy often quarrel because of Bruce's habit of flirting at work, but it is uncertain whether Judy is aware of Bruce's behavior towards female colleagues at work. However, the detective also discovered that Bruce and Judy's financial problems, caused primarily by Bruce's irresponsibility in overspending, had occurred in the months leading up to Judy's death. Bruce was deeply in debt, and the situation had become so serious that he was forced to borrow money from one place to pay off another. Judy had always managed her finances well throughout the marriage with her income, but she eventually began to resent Bruce, especially when she was given the added responsibility of caring for their daughter. The detectives discovered that a few weeks before Judy's death, Bruce had begun taking out multiple insurance policies in Judy's name, some of which had a double payout clause if Judy died in an accident. Detective Bob wondered if Bruce saw this as an opportunity to solve his financial problems and get out of the marriage with Judy. In fact, after Judy's death, Bruce was due to receive $330,000 from her insurance policies. What made investigators shudder was that in 1991, nearly 14 months before Judy's death, she had suffered a horrific accident. An 85-pound chimney block accidentally fell from the roof where Bruce was working, hitting Judy in the head and nearly killing her. Fortunately, she survived the attack, although she suffered a severe concussion and was hospitalized for several days. In another shocking development, a fire broke out in her house while Judy was sleeping alone. Fortunately, Judy woke up in time, called the fire department, and escaped once again. After these two incidents, Judy was very frightened. Some of Judy's friends told detectives that she had expressed her intention to leave her husband. Although she had a premonition that something was wrong, she stayed for the sake of her daughter. Judy's family was unaware of her feelings. At this point, Detective Bob Ball was almost certain that Bruce had killed his wife and deliberately staged it as a hunting accident, but he lacked physical evidence. He contacted Dan Castle, a metal detector expert who had helped the police many times before. Knowing that the fatal bullet might still be somewhere in the woods, Detective Bob asked Dan Castle to find it. Dan worked with his metal detector every day, but after searching for weeks without finding anything, he had a problem. The snow had covered up all traces of the bullet. Despite the setback, Dan was not ready to give up. He decided to experiment by using a slingshot to recreate the trajectory of the bullet and determine where it might have landed. Luckily, the idea worked. When he searched the area where his marble ricocheted in the snow, he found the bullet about 80 feet from a maple tree. The discovery of the bullet was important, but authorities needed to determine whether it was the bullet that killed Judy or just another bullet fired during hunting season. Ray Kenny, a firearms examiner from the Marquette State Police Crime Lab, was assigned to analyze the bullet. A few days later, he discovered some important details. It was a .30 caliber bullet from a Moss rifle, and it contained wood fibers. Kenny determined that this was the bullet that had hit the tree, but there was more evidence stuck inside. Kenny found a small pink fiber from Judy's shirt and some black fibers from her jacket. Finally, a crucial link was discovered, creating a major breakthrough in the case. Investigators then focused on Bruce's gun collection. They examined all the rifles that could have fired the bullet collected from the scene and identified 4 weapons that could have been involved. Bruce was forced to tell the truth, but he still chose to lie and denied owning any of the rifles. However, his luck ran out when Judy and Bruce's financial records showed a loan document that listed his gun collection as collateral. Detectives also found an asset list that included a gun that Bruce had not declared. It was a rifle with a scope, matching one of the 4 guns that could have fired the bullet. In the end, investigators concluded that the gun was probably the murder weapon. On April 23, 1993, after 5 months of investigation, Bruce agreed to take a polygraph test after many delays and evasions. During the first part of the test, Bruce calmly answered the investigators' questions. However, when the detectives placed Gail's letter in front of him, the interview took a critical turn. For the first time, Bruce changed his story and confessed to killing his wife after months of denial, perhaps because he realized Gale had cooperated with the police or feared that the authorities were finally closing in on him. With tears in his eyes, Bruce revealed that on November 29, 1992, he saw an opportunity to kill his wife. However, he said that the first 2 times he saw Judy from a distance, he aimed but could not shoot. The 3rd time, he closed his eyes, pulled the trigger, and Judy was fatally shot. Bruce explained that his motive for killing Judy was her threat to divorce him, which he did not want to happen. He claimed that Judy was a strict wife both at work and at home, and was not good at cooking. Bruce said that he threw the rifle into a nearby river, but the police could not find it after searching the water. He also pointed out an error in the medical examiner's report. Although the report said Judy was shot on the left side of the chest, Bruce insisted that she was actually shot on the right side and the bullet exited the left side. This detail was crucial to his confession, as only the killer would know this. Bruce was immediately arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Surprisingly, despite his confession, he pleaded not guilty, claiming that the police had coerced him into confessing. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Bruce, prosecutors decided to seek more evidence in preparation for the trial. Investigators reenacted the moving of the chimney, which Bruce had previously said he had accidentally pushed with his foot. However, they discovered that the chimney was too heavy to have been moved accidentally and required a deliberate act to make it fall. With dozens of witnesses and a wealth of evidence, the trial swung in favor of the prosecution. During this time, Bruce barely moved but burst into tears when Gale took the stand to testify. The defense, on the other hand, had no witnesses to testify. Bruce's attorney, Thomas Castleman, said all of their witnesses refused to appear out of fear. He called the investigation a witch hunt and accused the police of improperly obtaining confessions. As expected, the jury did not believe Bruce's story, and on December 15, 1993, they returned a guilty verdict. On January 21, 1994, Bruce Moylanen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought comfort to Judy's family. After the tragedy, Judy's brother and sister-in-law, David and Yvonne Blake, adopted 5-year-old Elise. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sajini. In December 2002, Thurun Jinaraj and Sajini Krishnan, a newlywed couple, started their life together. Thurun and Sajini's marriage was arranged, but the couple was very happy and were building a life together in their apartment. Thurun, a physical education teacher at a local school and a volleyball coach, his wife, Sajini, worked at a bank. Whenever Thurun went to watch volleyball, he would remind his wife, Sajini, that due to the unsafe burglary situation in the area, Sajini should go to her father's house instead of staying alone in their apartment. Sajini's father lived nearby, so she would go to her father's house whenever Thurun went to watch volleyball. On February 5, 2003, Sajini visited her father's house for the last time. Before leaving, she said that she needed money to fill up her car's gas tank. Sajini's father was surprised and asked if Thurun was taking good care of her. Sajini appeared angry and dismissed her father's concerns, saying, "Dad, there's no such thing." Her short reply made her father feel uncomfortable, thinking that it might just be a minor disagreement between the couple. On February 14, 2003, at 7:30 p.m., Sajini had a phone conversation with her sister that lasted about 15 minutes. 2 hours later, at about 9:30 p.m., Thurun contacted Sajini's father, informing him to come to the hospital immediately because Sajini's condition was critical. Family members rushed to the hospital and found that Sajini had passed away. Thurun was deeply moved and cried loudly. Sajini's cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a scarf. When the police arrived at the scene, Thurun reported that their house had been broken into, jewelry and money had been stolen, and belongings had been thrown around. Initially, the police suspected that the thieves might have killed Sajini when she discovered them. Thurin's emotional state was so shocked that he couldn't stop crying. His pain was too great, and as a result, his condition worsened. He was so distraught that he couldn't even attend Sajini's funeral. Due to his deteriorating condition, Thurin was hospitalized, where his family provided him with emotional support. Meanwhile, the police were working to identify potential suspects by compiling a list of known thieves in the area. On February 16, 2003, 2 days after Sajini's death, Thurin's brother contacted the police, informing them that Thurin had escaped from the hospital. The police were shocked to find that Thurin had escaped from the hospital. Initially, they had assumed that Thurin was completely innocent due to his poor condition, so the police did not assign anyone to closely monitor Thurin while he was in the hospital. However, Thurin's sudden disappearance aroused the police's suspicions. Sajini's family began questioning the police, demanding to know why they had let their guard down and allowed Thurin to escape. As the case attracted widespread media attention, the pressure on the police increased. They immediately launched a thorough search for Thurin. Meanwhile, Thurin's family was also brought in for questioning by the police, but they were released after a few days. Thurin lived with Sajini in an apartment, while the rest of his family lived elsewhere. A massive search operation was launched across the city to find Thurin. The police set up roadblocks at several locations. Despite these efforts, Thurin remained undetected. Pressure from Sajini's family on the police led to the announcement of a large reward for anyone providing information on Thurin's whereabouts. However, even this lucrative offer failed to yield any leads. Police searches were ultimately unsuccessful. It was later revealed that Thurin had been mistreating Sajini since their marriage, motivated by his extramarital affair with another woman. The police eventually tracked down the girl Thurin had been involved with. She told them that on February 16, Thurin had called her and asked her to marry him. However, she had already learned about Sajini's death by then. As a result, she rejected Thurin's proposal outright, telling him she couldn't marry someone suspected of murder. After that, Thurin and the girl lost contact. Nearly 6 years passed without any update on Thurin from the police. The police kept a close watch on Thurin's family, thinking that he might contact or return home. However, Thurin did not see or contact his family during this time. The police discovered that exactly 6 years after the incident, Thurin had visited his parents in another state, but only briefly, as his father had passed away just a day later. Although the police expected Thurin to return for his father's funeral, Thurin did not return. In 2016, a new officer joined the department and reviewed the case file, asking for an update. The police informed him of the current situation, that Thurin's father had passed away, his mother was ill and living in Madhya Pradesh, and his brother lived in Ahmedabad, but there was still no information about Thurin's whereabouts. The police conducted another investigation by discreetly monitoring the area around Thurin's mother's house, looking for any young men who might visit her. Unfortunately, no leads were found. The police then decided to question the girl who had a relationship with Thurin. She reported that she had not had any contact with Thurin since the incident. However, some of her friends had recently mentioned to her that they thought they saw someone who looked like Thurin at a mall in Delhi. The police formed a team to investigate this new information and visited the mall in Delhi. They checked the footage from all the surveillance cameras, but could not find any evidence of Thurin. After receiving multiple reports of sightings of Thurin in various states, the police became increasingly convinced that he was still alive. They therefore launched a thorough investigation by analyzing around 4,000 mobile phone numbers linked to Thurin's family and friends, hoping to uncover a vital clue. Although their search did not yield any significant breakthroughs, the police were determined to find Thurin. They kept a close watch on his mother's phone, scrutinizing her calls to identify her contacts. Thurun's mother received a call on her mobile phone from a landline number in Bengaluru, also known as the Silicon Valley of India. The call originated from the customer care service of a Bengaluru-based Oracle company. This made the police wonder about the connection between Thurun's mother and the Oracle company. The police suspected that Thurun, whom they were looking for, might be working at the Oracle office in Bengaluru. A police team traveled from Ahmedabad to Bengaluru to investigate further. On October 22, 2018, police visited the Oracle office and met the HR department, but police did not disclose the real purpose of their visit. Instead, they informed the HR department that police needed a list of all employees for law and order purposes. The HR department cooperated and provided the police with a complete list of all Oracle employees. In order to avoid being detected by Thurun, the police had to be extremely careful in their approach, as they knew that Thurun would likely escape if he realized that the police were following him. The problem was, Thurun's name was not on the list that Oracle had provided to the police. This made them worry that their efforts might be in vain. However, one name on the list stood out: Parvin Batelli. When the police recalled that Thurun's mother often spoke to Parvin and his wife, Nisha, this connection piqued the police's interest, and they decided to gather more information about Parvin and Nisha in the hope of finding clues about Thurun. The police found it suspicious that Parvin and Nisha were not active on social media, as this is a rare phenomenon in today's digital age, when most people actively share their lives on social media. The police learned that Thurun's mother frequently talked to Parvin Batelli. In addition, Parvin and Nisha had 2 children. The police began to suspect that Parvin Batelli could be Thurun. Therefore, the police began to collect evidence against him. One feature of Thurun's finger during his time as a volleyball coach was a broken and slightly bent finger on his ring hand. On October 23, 2 policemen went to Oracle's customer service office in Bangalore to meet Parvin. When one of the policemen shook hands with Parvin, the policeman immediately recognized Thurun because of the familiar broken finger. The policeman said, "Thurun, your game is over." Upon hearing Thurun's name, Parvin's condition worsened. Thurun's mistake began when his cell phone stopped working, leaving him worried about his mother. Thurun used his office landline instead of a number he could safely use to contact his mother. This last mistake led to his arrest. If he had not used his office landline, the police likely would not have found him. Thurun was taken to Ahmedabad by the police, where he confessed to the crime, admitting to killing his wife Sajini Krishnan. Thurun shared the entire story with the police. After the murder, Thurun proposed to a friend, but was rejected. He then moved to Pune, took up a small job, and met Nisha. Thurun tricked Nisha into believing that he was an orphan with no family, after which the two got married. The couple moved to Bangalore in 2009, where Thurun began working for Oracle. After years of investigation and manhunt, Thurun Jinaraj was finally recaptured in 2019. In March 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Anupama Gulati. Anupama, who lives with her husband and 2 children, was born and raised in Dehradun, but her parents and brother were often worried because they could not reach her on the phone. Since her family used to call her frequently, this loss of contact worried her family. Anupama's brother, Sujan Pradhan, decided to call Anupama's husband, Rajesh Gulati, whom she had been married to since 1999, to ask about his sister. However, every time Sujan Pradhan called, Rajesh would say that Anupama was either busy or had gone on a business trip. This went on for about 2 weeks. During this time, Anupama contacted her brother via email, informing him that she was completely fine and very happy with her husband and 2 children. This reassured her family. However, when they continued to be unable to reach Anupama on the phone, her parents asked Sujan Pradhan to go to Dehradun and meet Anupama. On December 12, 2010, when Sujan Pradhan went to Rajesh's house, Rajesh greeted him unfriendly and said that Anupama was elsewhere and he could not meet her right away. On the other hand, Sujan Pradhan tried to break into Rajesh's house, leading to heated arguments between the two. However, Rajesh did not allow Sujan to enter the house. When Sujan asked Rajesh about Anupama, Rajesh did not provide a satisfactory answer. Sujan decided to go to the nearby police station and filed a missing report for his younger sister, Anupama Gulati. In the report, he also said that he was trying to enter the house but was prevented by Rajesh. The police found the case suspicious and went to Rajesh Gulati's house. When Rajesh saw the police with Sujan, Rajesh tried to remain calm. The police asked Rajesh about Anupama, but Rajesh did not answer directly and tried to distract them. However, the police soon discovered Rajesh's cunning and decided to conduct a full search of the house. During the search, the police noticed a closed room. When the room was opened, there was nothing unusual except a large freezer. The police found the presence of a freezer very strange because such appliances are commonly used in large shops and restaurants. The police wondered why Rajesh would buy such a large freezer for his small family, but he just kept quiet. The police decided to open the freezer to investigate and found many small black bags inside. When they opened one bag, they discovered pieces of meat and then took out some more envelopes. The surprise came when they found a human skull in one of these envelopes. Rajesh Gulati then confessed to the police that the pieces were the body of his wife, Anupama. He broke down in tears and narrated the story. After his confession, the police arrested Rajesh and took him to a local court. There, he was remanded in custody for 5 days. During further investigation, the police discovered a surprising piece of information. Rajesh explained that he had met Anupama at Delhi University, where they both studied and got to know each other. They soon developed feelings for each other and started falling in love. Initially, they kept their relationship a secret from their families, but later decided to go public and asked for permission to get married. Both families agreed and they had a grand wedding in 1999. After marriage, Rajesh's career grew rapidly, and he found a job in a large company in the US. Rajesh and Anupama moved to the US so that he could work as a software engineer. They were living comfortably now, and they had bought a house, which meant that their finances were stable. However, after a few months, Anupama started feeling lonely because Rajesh often went to work every day and she had to stay home alone. During her boredom, Anupama often contacted a close friend of Rajesh's. Later, Rajesh found out that Anupama had become close friends with a close friend of his. Rajesh felt uncomfortable knowing that Anupama and his friend were talking on the phone frequently. This caused many arguments between them. Rajesh asked Anupama many times to stay away from his friend, but she did not listen. This made the situation worse in their home. However, in 2006, Anupama gave birth to twins, and the birth of a daughter and a son brought happiness and harmony to the family. While living in the US, Rajesh and Anupama enjoyed a fairly comfortable life. However, that was completely disrupted in 2007 and 2008 when the US fell into an economic recession, leaving many unemployed. Rajesh, after trying to keep his job for a while, also fell into unemployment. To sustain the family, Rajesh used his savings, but as the situation could not last forever, the savings eventually ran out. At that time, Rajesh had no choice but to sell his house in the US. After selling the house, Rajesh decided to return to India with his family. However, Anupama continued to keep in touch with Rajesh's friends over the phone, and this caused a major argument that led to a conflict between Rajesh and Anupama. The arguments escalated and the couple took the matter to the family court. The court eventually decided that Rajesh would provide Anupama with 20,000 rupees per month to meet their expenses. Thereafter, Rajesh and Anupama lived together in a rented flat for a few months in a place called Governor. After some struggle, Rajesh got a job in a big company in Kolkata, about 990 miles away from his home. For the sake of his job, Rajesh had to leave his wife and 2 children and start a new life in Kolkata. In Kolkata, around 2009, Rajesh met a married woman who was suffering from an unhappy marriage. Her husband was not good and often abused her. When Rajesh heard the story of this woman, he felt sympathy for her, and gradually, the two became close friends. Gradually, their friendship developed into love. After some time, they decided to marry each other secretly at a temple in Kolkata, without informing any of their family or friends. Rajesh returned to his normal routine after his second marriage. He maintained regular contact with his first wife, Anupama, went to work daily, and kept his second marriage a secret from everyone. However, Anupama noticed changes in Rajesh's behavior and suspected that he was involved with another woman in Kolkata. But she was unaware that Rajesh had actually remarried. The couple continued to argue over this issue, and their relationship became so strained that Anupama started thinking about divorce. However, Rajesh successfully convinced Anupama, and they did not go through with the divorce. But when Rajesh failed to pay Anupama, the court ordered maintenance of 20,000 rupees. These financial disputes finally reached a boiling point on October 17, 2010, when Rajesh and Anupama had a huge argument. Rajesh becomes enraged and violently pushes his wife, Anupama, causing her head to hit the corner of the bed. As a result, she starts bleeding profusely. Initially, Rajesh is shocked, but moments later, he lifts a pillow from the bed and uses it to smother Anupama. However, unbeknownst to Rajesh, Anupama is already deceased. Rajesh then frantically searches for a place to hide his wife's body, aware that his children will soon return home from school. With time of the essence, he moves Anupama's body to the second bathroom in the house and locks the door. As he tries to devise a plan to dispose of the body without arousing suspicion, his children arrive home from school and ask about their mother. Rajesh fabricates a story, telling them that their mother suddenly left for Delhi. Rajesh's children believe their mother, Anupama, had gone to visit their grandparents in Delhi. However, Rajesh had other plans. While the children were in school, he went to the market and purchased several items, including a deep freezer, an electric chainsaw, a stone cutter machine, and small black envelopes. When Rajesh brought these items home, he hid them in a separate room. When the children left for school the next day, Rajesh began the gruesome process of dismembering Anupama's body with an electric saw. He closed all the doors and windows to block out the noise. According to Rajesh's statement, Rajesh cut Anupama's body into 72 pieces. He then placed each piece into black bags and carefully stored the bags in the deep freezer to prevent the smell of the deceased from spreading. This process took Rajesh several days to complete. During this time, Rajesh continued to deceive Anupama's parents and brother by making excuses whenever they called, unaware of the horrific events unfolding at his residence. Rajesh took steps to cover up Anupama's disappearance by making excuses to their neighbors and telling their children that their mother had traveled to Delhi. He also had access to Anupama's email account, which allowed him to maintain communication with Sujan Pradhan, Anupama's brother, making it seem as though Anupama was still alive. Following the murder, Rajesh took the children on a weekend trip to Mussoorie in Uttarakhand. During the trip, he would collect 2 or 3 envelopes from the fridge containing pieces of Anupama's body and dispose of them in the forests or gorge along the way. This revelation shocked everyone, and the police began searching the areas where Rajesh claimed to have disposed of Anupama's remains. After an extensive search, the police found some black bags containing body parts in the surrounding forests and gorge. Based on this evidence, Rajesh Gulati was arrested and sent to jail. Rajesh Gulati's twin children were sent to Delhi to live with Anupama's brother, Sujan Pradhan. A court had granted Sujan official custody of the children on March 7, 2011. Rajesh Gulati's father, Satyapal Gulati, appealed this decision but was unsuccessful. On November 3, 2012, the court dismissed his appeal and confirmed that Chari would retain custody of the children. Evidence provided by the police revealed the horrific nature of the crime. Rajesh Gulati had brutally murdered his wife and then cut her body into 72 pieces. After a 7-year trial, Rajesh Gulati was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment on September 1, 2017. He was also ordered to pay a fine of 1.5 million rupees. The court ordered that 70,000 rupees of the fine would go to the state treasury, while the remaining amount would be deposited in the names of the twin children. The children would have access to this money only after they came of age. Rajesh Gulati was sentenced in a lower court, but he appealed this decision in a higher court in 2018. However, there has been no ruling on his appeal yet, resulting in his prolonged imprisonment. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kristen Rossum. Ralph and Constance Rossum were dedicated parents to their 3 children, prioritizing their kids' development and well-being above all else. Their children were educated from a young age, attended good schools, and they encouraging their children to explore their interests through a variety of extracurricular activities. However, their daughter Kristen struggled to cope with the pressure of living up to family expectations. Feeling overwhelmed and desperate to escape, Kristen began to rebel by lying, skipping school, and finding ways to escape her temporary problems. At first, she felt more comfortable when she drank alcohol, but over time, the effects of alcohol stopped being effective for her. As a result, she turned to the controlled substance methamphetamine and eventually became dependent on it. Methamphetamine, commonly referred to as meth, is widely considered the most addictive illicit substance in the United States. Its use often leading to paranoia, impaired judgment, and euphoria. Kristen's parents noticed her erratic behavior and, in a conversation, discovered she'd been struggling with the substance since high school. Her entire family, who were highly educated, were shocked and deeply affected by this behavior. After months of conflict with her parents, 17-year-old Kristen secretly ran away. While vacationing in Mexico with friends, she met a tall, handsome man named Gregory de Villers, who was 7 years her senior. Over time, they fell in love with each other. He helped her get settled and get her health back. With Gregory's support, she turned her life around by getting a job at the local forensic service as a toxicology assistant. Her skills impressed the employer and her addiction was forgotten. As a forensic assistant, Kristen graduated from college with honors. Her teachers and employers praised her and gave her the Best Student Award without knowing the reason why she loved her chosen profession. After 5 years of dating Gregory, they had their grand wedding on June 5, 1999. Kristen's parents loved Gregory dearly and were relieved that their daughter had overcome the pain of her past and was now on the path toward a bright and fulfilling future. In March 2000, Kristen was hired by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist, specializing in analyzing body fluids for narcotics. Gregory was working in the biotechnology industry at the time. But Kristen soon grew tired of her dull and monotonous life, and she began to look for excitement elsewhere. She met a new co-worker, Michael Robertson, who had just been appointed as the department head. Although Michael was married, they unexpectedly developed strong feelings for each other. They couldn't keep their relationship a secret for long. Gregory discovered many love letters between his wife and Michael. The marriage relationship was getting worse, yet Gregory remained hopeful that it could be salvaged. Understanding his wife's weakness, he made an effort to support and rescue her from her difficulties, hoping to mend their relationship. This time Kristen did not want to be saved, she asked for a divorce on Monday morning, November 6, 2000. Kristen was getting ready for work as usual. Gregory was sick and at home. Kristen was very tired, worrying about her husband. In the days after their breakup talk, he was indifferent and unusually calm. Kristen informed Gregory's workplace that he was sick, and then she also visited her husband during her lunch break. Gregory fell asleep at 9:22 p.m. That same day, Kristen called the emergency services to report that her husband Gregory was not breathing. He had most likely committed suicide as he was home alone. Kristen was crying on the phone and she lost her temper, so she did not listen to the dispatcher's instructions about performing an autopsy and performing first aid on her husband. Police and paramedics arrived at the scene at 10:19 p.m. Gregory was pronounced dead. He was lying on the bedroom floor with his torso exposed, surrounded by scattered rose petals. An examination of the room revealed evidence suggesting that Gregory taking a fatal amount of multiple prescription medications. Empty painkiller bottles were scattered around the room, and torn wedding photos were found on his bed. When questioned, Kristen said she told Gregory she wanted to separate the night before, just over a year after their wedding. She felt regret about the marriage, thinking they rushed into it too quickly. Kristen also found Gregory too controlling and she wanted more space. Gregory's death was initially ruled a suicide, caused by a powerful sedative. Kristen signed the cremation papers, but Gregory's family and friends were skeptical. They had noticed no changes in his personality or mood, and they believed he would never use those fatal drugs. The family's doubts led them to try to stop the cremation and request an autopsy. Their persistence eventually led investigators to consider the possibility that Gregory's death was not a suicide, but a murder. An investigation into Gregory's death revealed the fentanyl, a painkiller 150 times more potent than morphine, along with smaller amounts of other substances including clonazepam and trace. Initially, the cause of death was suspected to be an overdose of oxycodone, often referred to as heroin, but further investigation pointed to fentanyl as the lethal dose. A substance can provide pain relief and produce a feeling of euphoria. However, it can also slow down breathing and be fatal if not treated in time. Because of the strong effects of clonazepam and other substances found in Gregory's body, investigators speculate that someone else intentionally gave him a fatal dose of fentanyl. Kristen became the prime suspect due to her extensive knowledge and access to powerful prescription medications like fentanyl. During questioning, Kristen's disheveled appearance and history of substance abuse raised suspicions about her potential involvement in Gregory's death. Her own testimony revealed inconsistencies on the day her husband died. Initially, Kristen told medical staff that he was not taking any medications, but later changed her statement to suggest that he may have taken oxycodone at the hospital. The change in her story, combined with her knowledge and access to powerful prescription drugs, supported the argument that Kristen was involved in her husband's death. On November 8, the police received a call from Russ Lowe, a coworker of Kristen's. Russ revealed that Kristen was having an affair with her boss. Further investigation uncovered evidence of Kristen's relationship with her boss, Michael. This evidence consisted of affectionate emails and computer documents. Notably, the documents also revealed Michael's knowledge of phenyl, a substance that later became significant in the murder case. Kristen and Michael's relationship became a key aspect of the investigation. It is suspected that Gregory became a threat to Michael and Kristen because he knew that Kristen had access to the laboratory and that she had secretly used narcotics. Michael covered for Kristen, supporting her actions. During the investigation, Michael admitted to being aware of Kristen's drug addiction at the time. Although no charges were filed against Michael and Kristen, but they were both fired for violating several rules. Kristen's troubles started in January when police searched her home for evidence of drug use. Initially, she was arrested but later released on bail. A new proof shed light on the investigation. Kristen's diary, uncovered during the initial examination. Kristen didn't write the diary for personal reflection, but rather as a way to present herself to others and maintain her innocence, while making her husband Gregory's death look like a perfect suicide. Notably, on the day of his death, Kristen bought a rose to pair with lingerie that suggested infidelity. A medical examination of Gregory's body revealed that he had been unconscious for at least 6 hours before his death. The estimated time of death was likely about an hour to an hour and a half before it was officially confirmed. Furthermore, bruises were found around the needle marks on his arm. During the investigation, a short supply of the lethal substance was discovered at Kristen's workplace, along with other narcotic substances. A suspicious vial of fentanyl was also found, leading police to suspect that Kristen had poisoned Gregory without his knowledge. Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail. The prosecution's main argument in her first trial centered around the motive for the murder. They claimed that Kristen killed Gregory to protect her reputation because he threatened to expose her drug addiction and her affair with Michael. The prosecution alleged that Kristen used a powerful synthetic opioid called fentanyl to poison Gregory. Fentanyl is 80 times more potent than morphine. It was suggested that Kristen initially attempted to kill Gregory with a different substance, clonazepam, but when this failed, she used fentanyl. To make it seem like Gregory had taken his own life, Kristen staged the scene by ripping out pages from her diary and placing personal items, including rose petals and a wedding photograph, around his body. As a biochemistry graduate, Kristen leveraged her knowledge of chemistry and drugs to orchestrate Gregory's death. The prosecution also claimed that Kristen deliberately withheld information about the fentanyl from her colleagues in the medical examiner's office, aiming to mislead them into believing Gregory's death was self-inflicted before his autopsy. The developments of what happened that day are reproduced as follows. On the morning of November 6, she contacted Gregory's workplace to report his absence, then headed to her workplace. Her colleagues stated that around 9 a.m., she began her workday. However, they recalled finding her crying in their Michael's office about an hour later. The manager of the apartment building where Kristen and Gregory were staying witnessed Kristen returning home at 12:10 p.m. Shortly after, at 12:41 p.m., Kristen went to a nearby grocery store and bought various items. Among these purchases was a credit card statement. This confirmed her emergence at the store several hours before Gregory's death. Additionally, Kristen made multiple phone calls to Michael. The San Diego County Medical Examiner, Dr. Blackburn, who performed Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been deceased for at least an hour by the time paramedics arrived. The examiner also disclosed that Gregory was suffering from early-stage bronchopneumonia at the time of death. Breathing difficulties occur when lung secretions accumulate, often as a result of poor breathing. This can happen when a person is unconscious or taking very shallow breaths. Dr. Blackburn presented additional evidence, stating that Gregory's body contained a significant amount of urine in his bladder at the time of death. This accumulation would have caused severe discomfort if Gregory was conscious, suggesting he likely struggled to breathe for 6 to 12 hours before his death. Furthermore, Dr. Blackburn found it unlikely that Gregory, in an unconscious state, could have scattered rose petals on himself. During the trial, Dr. Blackburn also testified that the level of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was not high enough to be considered an overdose, and therefore, would not have been the cause of death. Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, stated that fentanyl, a powerful and fast-acting painkiller, can have severe side effects leading to respiratory arrest. The onset of its effects varies, based on the administration method. The fastest method of maximal effect is intravenous administration, which occurs within about 5 minutes. Intramuscular injection results in maximum effect within 15 to 20 minutes. This is followed by oral administration, with maximum effect within 20 to 30 minutes. The slowest method of maximal effect is the transdermal patch, which takes about 16 hours. Dr. Theodore testified before the court that fentanyl is typically not taken orally because the liver breaks down approximately 65% of the substance. As a result, only 35% of fentanyl is able to enter the bloodstream. However, when questioned about how fentanyl was detected in Gregory's body, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Theodore was able to provide a clear explanation. Dr. Theodore found that the amounts of fentanyl in Gregory's body, combined with the fact that Gregory had been unconscious and breathing shallowly for hours before his death, suggested that the fentanyl may have been given to Gregory by someone else. During the trial, the prosecution had difficulty explaining to the jury exactly how Kristen poisoned her husband. However, there was evidence that she may have applied a fentanyl patch to Gregory's arm while he was sleeping. Kristen's former workplace provided a crucial piece of evidence, as 15 fentanyl patches were discovered missing from the lab. While Kristen maintained her innocence, her defense team accepted that fentanyl was the cause of Gregory's death, but they suggested an alternative explanation. According to the defense, Gregory intentionally gave himself a fatal dose due to feelings of desperation about family problems. In court, Kristen recounted her of events on the morning of November 6th. She recalled waking up to find Gregory in a state of distress. Gregory called his employer at 7:42 a.m. to report his illness and informed them that he would not be going to work. Kristen claimed she left for work, but returned to their apartment during her lunch break to check on Gregory. When she asked him why he was so upset, Gregory replied that he was feeling unwell due to taking oxycodone and clonazepam and planned to stay home and rest. Kristen returned to work after that and came home around 8 p.m. Upon arrival, she found Gregory in bed and assumed he was asleep. She went to take a shower, and when came out, she tried to wake him, but when she touched him she felt cold. Kristen then immediately called emergency services. During questioning, the prosecutor questioned the validity of Kristen's explanation. She admitted to lying in the past and lying about her drug use, which made her testimony seem suspect. Autopsy and toxicology results showed that Gregory had been unconscious for approximately 6 to 8 hours before his death, contradicting Kristen's initial claim that they had lunch together that day. The defense argued that the concentration of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was not fatal on its own. However, they acknowledged that the combined effects of oxycodone, an opiate, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, could be more potent than the effects of either substance alone. They suggested that Gregory may have accidentally taken the drugs, but they could not explain why the high concentration of fentanyl was found in his body, which remains unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and special circumstance murder due to poisoning. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Kristen claimed innocence and appealed the verdict in the appellate court, where a critical mistake by her own defense team was discovered. Her lawyers had admitted that fentanyl caused the death but failed to test the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. This important test will help determine whether Gregory ingested fentanyl and whether the fentanyl in his body was due to contamination from laboratory testing rather than what he actually ate in. If fentanyl was only detected in the samples and not in Gregory's body, the prosecution's theory that fentanyl caused his death would be incorrect. The appeal also revealed a chain of custody violation regarding the samples. Although the samples were marked and placed in a cardboard box, the containers were not sealed. They were left at the medical examiner's office for approximately 36 hours before being shipped to the sheriff's forensic lab due to the recipient's absence. During this time, the samples were potentially accessible to anyone with a key to the medical examiner's office building, raising concerns that someone may have contaminated the samples. Kristen's appeal contends that any individual with a motive to falsify evidence could have added the substance to the sample. A panel of judges from the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed Kristen's case and concluded that her lawyers had made a serious error. The prosecution claimed Gregory died of a fentanyl overdose. Kristen's lawyers, however, did not contest that claim. Instead, they accepted the fentanyl overdose explanation. The judges did not overturn the verdict but sent the case back to the lower court to decide whether the defense's error could have changed the outcome of the trial. The U.S. Supreme Court has issued a ruling stating that federal courts must respect the decisions made by state courts in similar cases. This ruling impacts Kristen's case, as the court has voted against a hearing and her appeal was denied, leaving her in custody. Kristen's trial was not the only part of the case. She had a co-defendant named Michael. Although he was not in the U.S. for the trial, he is still a part of the case and risks being arrested if he returns. However, he may be eligible for a $100,000 bail. Michael has been living in Australia, where he works as a forensic toxicologist. Kristen Rossum was arrested in 2003 and received a life sentence without parole. Gregory's family is now suing the county for allowing Kristen to steal a lethal dose of the same drug without detection, and they blame the county's negligence for her crime.